Yep, good morning. You can usually tell it's the right time to start the meeting when the room gets quiet. But let me introduce myself. I'm Pedro Nava. This is the Little Hoover Commission hearing on organic waste recycling, Part 1, for Wednesday, July 6, 2022. I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you for joining us today, whether you are here at Long Beach City College. Maybe I should better say that the glorious Long Beach City College. I went to community college. I'm not going to tell you where, but I'm going to tell you it didn't look anything like this. This is an extraordinarily beautiful campus with a focused mission to provide the best quality services for its students and its faculty. And you are to be commended and congratulated for the work that you've done and that what you continue to do and what you offer the community. I want to introduce the other commissioners who are here with us. I have Vice Chair Sean Varner, Commissioners Dion Aroner, Bill Emerson, and Gil Garcetti. We also will be joined by Assembly Member Tasha Berner Horvath. Joining us remotely are Commissioner David Beyer, and soon I expect, hello David, soon I expect we will see Senator Jim Nielsen. We also have the commission staff, the Executive Director Ethan Rarick, analyst
You
Ashley
stop
Curry,
video.
Rachel Mattioli, there's Senator Nielsen, welcome, and the commission summer intern Jose Gonzalez. Project managers Crystal Beckham and Tristan Stein, and administrative analyst Sherry McAllister are joining us remotely. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping before we turn to the subject at hand. We will break for lunch shortly after and reconvene the meeting at about 1:15 p.m. The commission will hold its business meeting during lunch. The business meeting is open to the public should you wish, and you are welcome to attend. We are live streaming today's hearing on Zoom, and we will be joined by members of the public who are attending remotely. We'll have a public comment session at the end of the hearing. If you're here with us in person and you'd like to make a public comment, please fill out a public comment slip and give it to one of our staff members. Members of the public who have joined us online will be muted during the hearing. If you wish to make a comment, you'll be unmuted during the public comment session at the end of our hearing. If you want to make a public comment online, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. Those of you who have joined us by phone, you can send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov, letting us know you want to address the commission. Please provide your phone number from which you have joined the meeting so we know who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the duration of our hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording today's hearing, and after the hearing, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to our YouTube channel. And before I get to the substance of today's hearing, commissioners, if you weren't here to receive the orientation on the microphones, at the base of it, there is a little tiny button that's extremely sensitive. If you want to speak, touch it, the red light will go on and your mic will be hot. That's sort of a warning given what some people have experienced with hot mics when they weren't paying attention. Now, recycling organic waste is California's ambitious new effort to combat climate change. Residents and businesses are now required by law to separate food scraps, yard waste, and other organic materials from the rest of their garbage. For decades, organic waste has been dumped in landfills, where it releases harmful methane gas as it decomposes. This gas traps heat in the atmosphere, exacerbating already rising temperatures and undermining California's actions to mitigate the effects of climate change. According to CalRecycle, reducing organic waste in landfills will have the fastest impact on the climate crisis. By 2025, the state aims to reduce organic waste by 75% and to rescue at least 20% of edible food that is currently thrown out. Yet the state faces serious questions about whether it has the infrastructure needed to implement this new law. This is the first in a series of commission hearings examining this important issue. Our goal is to identify how California's organics recycling law is being implemented, examine what impact it has on the state's environmental goals, and to provide recommendations to the governor and the legislature for changes. As I mentioned previously, today's hearing will include a morning and afternoon session. During the morning session, we'll hear an overview of organic waste disposal in California and the purpose of SB 1383, the new law that's being implemented. Later in the morning, we'll have a panel on current edible food recovery efforts. This afternoon session will focus on how the state can better help local governments divert organic waste. I want to thank Commissioners Beyer, who's joined us from somewhere far, far away, and Canella for serving on the subcommittee for this study and for their leadership on this crucial topic. We're honored this morning to be joined by one of our state's most distinguished leaders, Assembly Member Speaker Anthony Rendon. Speaker Rendon has long been an advocate of California's role in addressing climate change, and we are truly grateful that he's agreed to make some introductory remarks as we open the hearing and begin this study. I also want to thank the Speaker's staff for assisting us in securing this beautiful venue. The Speaker represents a portion of the city of Long Beach, and we're honored to have him here with us today. But before you stand up, Speaker Rendon, and you make your introductory remarks, I want to recognize the President of Long Beach City College Board of Trustees, Uduak-Joe Ntuk, who has graciously agreed to welcome us to the campus, President Ntuk. And you can give me a round of applause if I pronounced your name correctly.
Very good. Good morning, Chair Nava, Commission. Welcome to Long Beach City College. We're incredibly honored to have you here today. On behalf of my colleagues, Superintendent Dr. Munoz, our faculty, staff, and employees, welcome. I do want to recognize my colleague, Vice President of our Board of Trustees, Herlinda Chico is here with us. Say hello.
Welcome.
And then we also have Dr. Munoz is here, our Superintendent President.
Welcome.
So we're honored to have you. This is an opportunity for us to host, significant events. We've been very fortunate to have President Biden on campus with us last year, Governor Newsom, and other legislative hearings over the years. But it's thanks to the ongoing support of our community and our voters that you see the beautiful campuses both here at the Liberal Arts Campus and our Pacific Coast Campus. It's been a multi-year modernization effort that's put in state-of-the-art learning and focused on environmental sustainability. LBCC is one of the first community colleges in California to undertake sustainability as one of our critical features in our planning and design as we work towards a 2050 goal of being completely net zero. In recognition of our efforts, we've been honored to receive the Excellence in Energy and Sustainability Award for the California Community College Chancellor's Office. We've received the Long Beach Green Schools Award, and numerous other awards because our buildings are built at a LEED certified standard of both silver and platinum, and it's been able to allow us to reinvest. We've actually lowered our operating expenses, and we're able to reinvest in our students and our classrooms. And now this legislation that's come forward today to address the proper recycling of organic waste is an important step forward in our state's effort to combat climate change, and we're looking forward to today's discussion to get input about how we can develop effective organics recycling infrastructure here at Long Beach City College. At LBCC, 67% of our annual enrolled students, of our 35,000 students, are financially disadvantaged or qualify for financial aid. And although we have excellent programs in place here to help both with housing and food security, both for them and their families, seeing that food does not go wasted and is available and not in the dumpster makes common sense and financial sense. So again, welcome to Long Beach City College. We're honored to have you and have a great hearing today.
Thank you, President Ntuk. And before I bring up Speaker Rendon, well, actually, it's my honor to recognize Speaker Rendon. And as he approaches the podium, I do want to point out that Speaker Rendon is one of the types of individuals who provide a specific kind of leadership, and that is leadership by example. Leadership by empowering committee leaders in the legislature, by setting the example and setting the tone for civility, for reasonable discourse, and for the pursuit of excellence in all of his endeavors. I am the Speaker's appointment to the Little Hoover Commission, For that, I am extremely grateful, and it is my honor to recognize Speaker Rendon. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Just as I say that, my colleague, Ms. Borner-Horvath, approaches the podium. It's good to see folks. This is our first few days of summer break, and we can't stand to be apart. I think Assemblymember Chen will also be here a little later, and good to see Senator Emerson, Assemblymember Nava, Senator Nielsen, the entire legislature past and present is here. But generally these meetings are held in Sacramento, which is obviously one of my two homes. But my district is here. My home is in Lakewood. This is, depending on whether I make a right or a left on Carson in the morning, this is often on my jogging trail. So we're exceptionally close to home right now, and it's good to be here and see, again, a lot of familiar faces during our summer break. This is obviously a topic that's critical to the state and incredibly important to me. Started working on this issue when I was executive director of the California League of Conservation Voters back in 2008, 2009. And when we think about the extent to which humans are affecting the environment, continuing to affect the environment, I think we find it necessary to continually educate ourselves on that fact. And particularly here in a place like California, where we fancy ourselves as leaders in the environment worldwide, I think it's obviously very important to think about the extent to which we are, and at times the extent to which we are not meeting our goals. And this is an important area of educating ourselves around that topic. When Ms. Borner-Horvath and I were at COP26 in Scotland, I did an interview that garnered a lot of attention, where I talked about the extent to which California is not leading the world in the environment, and particularly around climate change. We always think of ourselves as a world leader around climate change. And I feel that in the past half decade in particular, we've fallen behind a lot of different locales throughout the world. Today, having the Little Hoover Commission address this issue, the issue of particularly the issue of methane, I think is an opportunity for us to determine whether or not we are doing what we have set out to do, both as a legislative body and as a state. We need to know that California is on track, overall is on track, or not on track in terms of collecting organics, and that they're being processed in a way that ensures that methane reductions that methane is being reduced. I've been, again, critical of our climate action sometimes, but at the same time, California is certainly no slouch when it comes to climate actions overall. We've seen that in the last few days alone. The legislature passed a major plastics bill that was immediately signed by Governor Newsom. I would say it's probably the leading plastic reduction bill in the United States, if not the world. By 2032, we're going to require that all single-use packaging, including paper and metals, will be recyclable or compostable. On top of that, at least 65% of plastics packaging will have to be recycled. Controlling the use and creation of plastics is climate action, but there's certainly more to be done. And for me, what's so important about today, what's so important about the work of this body, is to make sure that we are achieving the goals that we set out to achieve. We are great at setting goals that at times can be abstract. We need to make sure that our accomplishments are tangible, that we're making the desired impact that we want on the world. For us, that's essential. So I think these steps towards making sure that we're taking strong action towards improving our climate are absolutely essential. So I thank you for the work of this body. I want to thank this great board behind me. It's impossible to not call Herlinda and Uduak by their first names, but board president and board member Thank you for your service, and thanks for all you do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before we move to the next part of our program, I think I'd like to give Assemblymember Tasha Burner-Horvath an opportunity to make some remarks, seeing as how you are the member that is currently involved in the initiatives that the speaker referred to.
There you go. Yes, thank you so much for allowing me to make these remarks. You know, when I decided to run for office, one of the things I wanted to do was protect the planet for our children, and my daughter, Maya, is sitting in the back of the room. And so it comes out of very personal motivation, and I've had the fortune of sitting in and subbing in on Nat Resources for the last few months, and we are dealing with major climate crisis, and we all know that. And my mayor of my city, Catherine Blakespeare, I remember when I was on council, she was like obsessed with composting. And I was like, seems kind of niche, right? Like you think of all the things you do for climate action, you think about fossil fuels and oil spills and plastics and all these things. And so composting, I always thought was very niche. And then I was assistant majority leader last year under the speaker, and we did a short report for the Democratic Caucus on reaching our, our methane goals. And we're not on track to reach our methane goals. We're not on track to meet any of the goals that we've set in California. We are a world leader, no question, but no one's on track, right? And then I looked, and there was some large percentage of methane emissions that come from composting. So I had to go back to my mayor and say, I thought that was kind of fringe when, you first brought this up, 5 years ago. And you were right. Like, it is a large source of methane. And the more we can compost, the more we reduce that methane, and it has larger benefits. So very fortunate to be here. We are doing a lot in the state of California. There's more to do, and I hope what we come out of here today is some concrete actions that we in the state of California can do to further our methane reduction goals, and not aspirational goals, but what the speaker spoke about, which was concrete actions that actually get us to where our goals are sending us. So thank you very much for having me. I look forward to discussion today.
Thank you very much for your comments. And again, Mr. Speaker, we appreciate you being here today, setting the tone and pushing us off in the right direction. So now I'd like to turn this over to Executive Director Ethan Rarick so we can begin with our witnesses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The first witness this morning who I'll invite up to the witness table is Nick Lapis, who is the Director of Advocacy from Californians Against Waste. He has been in that position for the past 15 years and has led CAW's team of advocates in campaigns to pass groundbreaking laws that have positioned California as a global leader in reducing and recovering waste. He also engages in policy development and research, representing CAW on various boards and commissions. Before joining Californians Against Waste, he worked on native habitat restoration and youth leadership development through several positions at Golden Gate National Parks. Mr. Lapis.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me and for holding this hearing and for taking on this issue. It's an incredibly important issue that doesn't get enough attention, and cannot thank you enough for taking this on. My name is Nick Lapis. I'm with Californians Against Waste. Can we go to the next slide? There we go. We're an environmental organization based in Sacramento. We've been around since the 70s, focused on waste reduction, recycling policy. Folks know us as the Bottle Bill organization, but since then we've also moved on to a lot of other waste reduction, recycling issues, including organics and plastics and all the other fun stuff that you hear about coming out of Sacramento. Next slide. So I want to talk about how we got to 1383, because I think that's an important context to set before we delve into the details of how we're going to implement it. And really, I was thinking about how to frame this, and the truth is that 1383 was really the combination of several important policies that collided at once. And I want to set that background a little bit. This is a slide I stole from CalRecycle, and I made the same one myself, but theirs looks better. And it basically shows that when you look at what's actually in our waste stream, what we're actually sending to landfills, 2/3 of that is organic waste. And we've done a great job of recycling, bottles and cans. We've been a leader in that for decades. But when we started looking at what is left over, it became very clear that what is left over is organic waste. And the legislature in 2011 passed a goal for the state of achieving a 75% recycling rate. And it was a goal, I was a sponsor of the legislation, so I think I can be critical of it. It was a goal that we set with absolutely no tools to achieve it. But it seemed like we needed that aspirational goal because we had a previous goal of 50% that we set in 1989. And once we hit it, we began sort of backsliding. And we needed the next aspirational goal. So if you look at reducing waste to 75%, and you look at what's in the waste stream, it becomes incredibly obvious that organics is the lowest hanging fruit. Next slide. At the same time, we have our climate policies. AB 32, obviously, in 2006, the various other legislation. As AB 32 was being implemented, as the state scoping plan was being written by the Air Board, there was some focus on landfill emissions, but realistically, most climate policy up until that point had really been focused on smokestacks and tailpipes, right? Something that is emitting pollution into the air. And when it came to the waste sector, they looked at it as landfills have emissions. And that's true, they do. I mean, there's only so much you can do to capture the gas from a 500-acre hole in the ground with rotting food in it, right? Like, we can put in gas collection systems, we can put in all these controls, there's only so much you can do. But the thought of diverting material, of preventing the gas from being generated, isn't something that had really been considered very much in climate circles. And this changed when people started thinking more about short-lived climate pollutants. The next slide. The legislature directed the Air Board to look at greenhouse gases that have a shorter lived history in the, or not history, a shorter life in the environment than CO2. And the reason for that is that CO2 emissions make up the bulk of our greenhouse gases, but there are other gases like methane and refrigerants and F-gases that have a disproportionate impact quickly on the environment. So you look at something like methane, and it delivers its entire climate forcing impact within 12 years. So next slide. Next slide. So basically what the Air Resources Board came out with is we cannot actually avert the impacts of climate change, the real life impacts of climate change in the short term, without dealing with these other gases, and methane being the most prominent of them. And when you start looking at methane, you see it basically boils down to ag and landfills. And in many ways, ag is a lot more complicated. With landfills, we know what to do. We can take that material out, we can compost it, we can make biofuels out of it. There's a lot of positive things we could do with organic waste that's currently being wasted and rotting in landfills. Next slide. So as part of the Air Resources Board's short-lived climate pollutant strategy, they basically said we need to get organics out of landfills. And they set an internal target of 90% reduction of disposal of organic waste by the year 2020. And they basically said they were going to use their regulatory authority to get there, which obviously sparked the legislature to come together to figure out the strategy for how to actually implement that. Nothing quite like the threat of the Air Resources Board regulating to bring people together. Next slide. The third thing that was happening at the same time that really collided here was groundbreaking research about the benefits of using compost. There was some research done at UC Berkeley and done in the Marin Carbon Project that was replicated all over the country, all over the state, that basically showed that when you apply compost to soils, it has all of these huge benefits, not the least of which is a significant carbon sink. It basically takes the agricultural sector from being a net source of emissions to being a regenerative source of sequestration. And how it does that is by basically the soil, healthy soil is full of bugs, full of life, full of microbes, which leads to more roots growing, which leads to more carbon being pulled out of the atmosphere. And even one-time applications of compost sequester carbon for 30 years. They just keep adding that benefit over time. And at the same time, it's not just about carbon sequestration, it's also about dealing with droughts and floods. So healthy soils are spongier, they can hold more water when it rains. They can hold more water when there's a drought, and so when it rains, it captures it. And when there's flooding, it prevents runoff. There's also a reduced need for fertilizer and pesticides and a lot of other inputs that have greenhouse gas impacts when you use compost in lieu of those inputs. So this concept of healthy soils and carbon farming and regenerative agriculture was really coming into its own in the academic world at the same time as the climate world was realizing that we had to deal with methane, at the same time as us wonky garbage people were looking at our 75% in our pie chart. And I would love to say that it was the pie chart that drove all this, but really it was the other two that were much more influential. Next slide. So as a result of a lot of negotiations and a lot of back and forth, there's basically a deal reached on legislation on SB 1383 by Senator Ricardo Lara. This was the state's short-lived climate pollutant strategy. I could spend hours probably going through the details of the negotiations and the back and forth and who was happy and who wasn't happy. And you might remember some TV ads with burping and farting cows. But the net effect was that basically the state set these goals: a 50% reduction in black carbon, 40% reduction in methane, and a 40% reduction in refrigerants. Next slide. And specifically for the waste sector, those are kind of the overarching goals. For the waste sector, there were very specific goals set and specific authority given to the state. And again, this was in lieu of the Air Board regulating. So this was a compromise that a majority of stakeholders came together around. And basically, the two important numbers there are 75% reduction in organic waste by 2025 and a 20% reduction in edible food that's currently being thrown away, getting that fed to people. A couple of other dates on there. Part of the compromise was that the regulations, this bill passed in 2016, but the regulations wouldn't go into effect until 2022. And fines on generators would not go into effect until 2024. So there would be a warm-up period where people get acclimated to the concept. And really, both this 2022 and 2024 date are designed to warm us up to get to the 2025 target, which is when this program should be fully up and running. And the reason I say that is that people look at where we are right now, and it's 2022, and programs are just starting, and everyone is quick to say, well, we're failing. We're not failing. This is exactly what was envisioned. We knew that this would be a big effort that would take multiple years, and this is the beginning of a long effort. Next slide. On the organic waste side, I'll say it's easy. And I'm saying that somewhat sarcastically because I realize how not easy it is, and you're going to hear representatives later from some local governments who are struggling with this. But it's not hard to put stuff in separate bins, take it to a composting facility, and compost it. We've had jurisdictions doing that all over the country. I mean, as humanity, we've been doing that for millennia, right? I mean, we had composting before we had landfills, right? But even on the modern sense, we've been doing that in San Francisco, in Seattle, all over the New England area for a long time now. And once people get the hang of it, it becomes second nature. You put your banana peel in the green can, not the black can. It's not that hard. Next slide. The other goal in there was edible food. And that one's in some ways trickier. So people don't talk about this as much, but the other target for the waste sector is to recover 20% of edible food and feed it to hungry people. It's not recovered for composting, not recovered for animal feed it to hungry people. And the reason I say that's trickier is that no city or state had really done that. No one had ever set a target, and no one can tell you that if you do this regulation, it will result in this percentage. So it's a little bit of uncharted territory. There's a little bit of going along, learning as we go along with the edible food. But there are some good examples in France and some other places of edible food policies. Next slide.
Yep, Mr. Lapis, before we go to the next slide, I failed to explain to you that what is a common practice with commissioners is, first of all, they've read the material, they haven't seen the slides, but you will be interrupted because, commissioners, what you've done is spark a question or a comment. So I want you to consider that a compliment. And I do this at this time because Commissioner Byer, who is joining us remotely, has raised his hand. So if you can be so kind as to entertain his question or comment, and then we can continue with your slides. I apologize for the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witness for a very thoughtful, cogent presentation that's benefits from visual learning. And I learned a lot from the presentation and the slides. But I want to go back to first a general observation, seconding the comments that the Assemblywoman made earlier. I struggle to understand how a law that was passed in 2016 is not in trouble if the assumptions that were made in 2016 have proven to not be true. And specifically biofuels, which according to investor-owned utilities does not seem to be a desired form of energy. And to the extent that's a linchpin of this entire program, I guess I would like to understand that and any other changes in the reality of the marketplace that would suggest that it's going to be really difficult to achieve these goals, aside from the food waste that the witness just talked about.
Yeah, it's a fair question. The truth is there isn't one linchpin. And I think that there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. Biofuels is a tool.
Is it going to work?
It will, and it will have a role.
And what data do you cite to support that if PG&E and Southern California Edison don't want the energy?
Well, the Public Utilities Commission just passed regulations requiring the public utilities to buy biogas. So there's going to be a percentage of biogas in the natural gas pipeline, a pretty significant percentage coming in the short term. And then the other, there's a lot of different uses for the biogas. The other big use is low carbon fuels. And the way the low carbon fuel standard program works is that basically different fuels have different carbon intensities, and the biogas based fuels are among the most carbon negative that exist. Basically, they're one of the only fuels where you have fewer emissions by using them than by not using them. So they have a high premium in the market, and that's driven a lot of facilities as well. But beyond that, biofuels and digestion are not the only solution. We've done, we've implemented organics programs with just composting, and they've been incredibly successful. I'm going to get to my next slide, but there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So as we were negotiating and arguing about this since I started in 2007, we got into this constant conversation of the chicken and egg, right? Well, we can't divert organics because we don't have composting facilities. Well, we can't build composting facilities because local governments aren't sending us organics, and we can't just hope that they show up. And it's this chicken and egg of we don't have infrastructure, we don't have collection, we don't have markets, you know, this kind of back and forth. And I think the approach that the state took, which is relatively novel, is saying yes and. You know, we have chickens and eggs at the same time in the world, right? They coexist. And so let's do everything. Let's work on siting and permitting policy. Let's work on funding and incentives. Let's work on biogas policy and incentives for anaerobic digestion and biofuels. Let's work on donation policies to increase the amount of food that's donated and tax incentives. Let's work on procurement, both at the local level and at the state level through Caltrans and DGS. Let's work on RPS, and let's work on offsets and compostable packaging and bin liners for people's houses, bins and liners that will make it easier for them to participate. And believe it or not, and I'm not going to go through all of these, there's been a bill on every single one of those items in the past 15 years. And so the legislature has really taken a yes and approach. And I can't say we solved all the issues. You know, we did a bill telling the regulatory agencies to coordinate together on compost permitting. And probably not a surprise to any of you, but the regulatory agencies didn't magically jump out of their silos and start worrying about each other's priorities. They had some meetings and put out a report, and the report is sitting on a shelf, and it didn't totally have the desired effect that we wanted, but we're still working on it. And I think that's true for all of these. One of the main arguments was, well, no ban without a plan. We need funding from the state. We can't just ban stuff and expect local governments to pick up the costs. Well, the legislature has allocated, last week, the legislature allocated $180 million to local governments to implement 1383. And that's following on a similar allocation from the year before. So I think our focus has been, how do we address all the issues at once? You know, if you need help with markets, how do we build markets? How do we encourage people to use compost in wildfire restoration to prevent mudslides? Or mine reclamation, because it sequesters the heavy metals in mines. And so there are all these different pieces that really go together, and I apologize for the cheesy stock photo of the success puzzle, but if you go to the next slide, the corollary to my key to success number one, and this is the point I wanted to make in response to the question, is that we can't afford to leave any tools in the toolbox. This isn't going to be one technology. This isn't going to be one type of facility that's going to handle all of this material. We have large-scale municipal composting facilities that compost hundreds of thousands of tons a year. We're going to need more of those. We have wastewater treatment facilities that have capacity to take organic waste as well. And there are perfect materials for those facilities, like food processing waste. We have community composters that are at a small scale, and you'll hear two of them later on. They're at a small scale, but have an outsized impact in terms of making the community care and actually understand why we're doing this. There are folks investing in enzymatic digestion, where they're basically taking food scraps and making fertilizer and animal feed using enzymes. We have folks growing black soldier fly larvae to use in aquaculture to grow fish. And so we can't just say, we need X facility, and if the incentives don't exactly line up for that type of facility, we should throw our hands up in the air and move on. And the other really big opportunity here is on-farm composting. We're used to thinking about organic waste from the perspective of the municipal sector. We're used to thinking of the yard trimmings, the food scraps, but the amount of organic waste in the agricultural sector is mind-boggling. And if you look at, and I'm not an agricultural policy expert, not as much as some of the commissioners, so I apologize in advance, but you know, I was struck a few years ago driving down the Highway 99 in the Central Valley, and there were people who were open burning their almond orchards where they turned them over. And so there were literally piles of orchard prunings that were being burned. And at the same time, a mile away, there were huge dairies with huge lagoons full of manure. And that manure was contaminating the groundwater. Well, what happens when you combine really dry orchard prunings with really wet manure is you get compost, right? But the second you combine those two, you need a permit, because that becomes a composting facility that needs a permit. And it's complicated, but we have all these different tools that need to be handled together, or this isn't going to work. And then I think I have one final slide. I think the other thing that I really want to stress is that we need to focus on the why of why we're doing this. And the reason I say that is, if you think about recycling, recycling didn't start off as a municipal service, right? It started off as an environmental cause. People fought for recycling to be a municipal service. Now we take it for granted, and we get a blue bin and everything magically goes away, and some nameless, faceless people figure it all out and everything gets recycled. But that's not how it started. And I have a fear that with organic waste, we've skipped that part of it and gone straight to giving people bins. We've dropped off green bins at their house, and we gave them a note that said the government is making us do this because there's a new law. We didn't explain the why. We didn't explain the climate benefits, the fact that we need to rebuild our soils, the fact that recovering this creates jobs. CalRecycle estimates this will create 14,000 additional jobs. We didn't explain the connection to growing healthy food. We didn't explain that this is among the most cost-effective ways to reduce greenhouse gases. Because if you poll the public, and we've seen this over and over, they want to take action on climate. And this is among the single most cost-effective ways to do it. What we've done instead is we've told them, here's your rate increase, and there's a law that came out of Sacramento that made us do that. And my fear there is that we're not gonna have the buy-in that's required for people to participate well, to be on board with the rate increases that are inevitable, and to support these programs when they struggle, because they will struggle, right? Every program we've ever implemented has struggled. And that's why I was thinking about the context of who your other speakers are, and you have two amazing community compost organizations who really do a fantastic job of telling the why. And I think we need more of that at the local level. We need to support organizations like them. We need more of that at the municipal level. We need more of that at the state level. This is something that people should be proud of doing, not something they're confused about, and that, again, some bill number that they've never heard of. Next slide. I think that's it. That's my contact information. Chairman, you promised interruptions. I didn't get enough of those, so I'm a little offended.
Well, wait, no, that was really very, very helpful and instructive, and I'll get to Commissioner Byer in just a moment. But I want to make sure that I got a text from my wife that says, congratulate him, meaning you, on the plastics bill passage for me. So there, I've done it, Susan. So, but what I
might interrupt just for 1 second.
Sure.
The person who probably needs the most congratulations on that, it's not even the speaker, it's Marie Lou, who's sitting back here, the speaker's environmental staffer, who really made an impossible deal come together in the past week. So, since she's here, I want to acknowledge that.
No, thank you. And before I get to Commissioner Byer, one of the things that I think we have all come to appreciate as commissioners, and as we meet and talk with people who are engaged in public service and in improving the lives of people in California, is how important it is that the individual who is doing the work does it in such a way that is collaborative and is welcoming and presents the information in a way that makes you want to accept it and then do something with it. And I have to tell you, I've never spoken with you before, and if I have, I've forgotten, I apologize, but you demonstrate that. I think what what I get from watching you do this is the perfect kind of personality to be able to weave the different perspectives together in such a way that you emphasize what is possible and what is commonly shared. Because it's the easiest thing in the world to do is start a fight. You don't even have to be remotely smart to be able to do that. And most people who do that aren't terribly smart. But what you have done, even in talking about how this legislation was born in 2016, an appreciation for the kind of buy-in that you have to have from so many different aspects of participants, from so many different stakeholders who have a variety of perspectives and interests, financial interests, as well as societal interests. But you demonstrate the kind of personality that is absolutely critical to bringing those kinds of perspectives together so that people can share a common interest and perspective. So I think that's probably a big reason why you've enjoyed the success that you have. Commissioner Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also congratulations on the plastic bill. I was astonished and amazed, and all those who worked on it deserve a hearty congratulations. I want to go back to implementation, because you referenced earlier the recycling efforts in California over the last multiple decades and their success, but there have also been problems. And by raising problems, I don't mean to suggest that I disagree with the existing law or don't support it, but rather to be realistic about what we're facing as impediments. And so maybe one way to do that is to ask you to sort of put aside the organic food disposal questions, because as you said, they're harder and more discreet in some ways, and leave aside agriculture. And just look at this as if you were the only person in charge of this entire program. What would be the three biggest problems that you think the state will face in implementing this law and meeting the goals?
Great question. Maybe it's because I was just, giving the slide that I just was, but I think it really is explaining the why and getting people bought in. And
okay, well, let's just assume you can do that in the same way the state did with respect to COVID.
but that's the scale that we need, and we don't
Okay, I'm just saying, I recognize that that's a necessity, but for example, is the biggest problem the coordination between Cal Recycle and the Air Board? Is the biggest problem the relationship between state government and local government? Is the biggest problem the lack of markets in particular sectors? I'm trying to get some sense of, ultimately, we're going to be writing a report, and that report's going to make recommendations about effectively mid-course corrections, because the law is not going to go fully into effect for several years. And so what should we recommend to the legislature and the governor about mid-course corrections? I'm trying to anticipate what the problems are.
Yeah, honestly, I think the single most important thing would be gumption by local elected officials. When Gavin Newsom was running for governor, he famously said at a rally, if you think gay marriage was controversial, try mandating composting. But, once he did, the folks in San Francisco love that program. The polling and the support for that program is through the roof, but it took the leadership of an elected official to really say, we need to do this. And I think that lack of gumption by local elected officials who are faced with the real unpopularity of raising rates is the single biggest barrier. And I'm not sure how that translates to a report to the governor or the legislature, but that is my answer. I think you said top three, but that's what comes to mind.
So nothing else bothers you or worries you about implementation?
No, I think the rest of it will come together. Honestly, I think it will. one of the slides I mentioned this concept we have we call RFP it and they will come. And it's
Yeah, I guess I'm reflecting a little bit on work done by the Little Hoover Commission staff about permitting of sites for purposes of organic waste disposal. There seem to be conflicts between kind of the methane side of the world and the carbon dioxide side of the world. There are cost questions. Do you see any problems there?
I totally do, but they can all be overcome. And so yes, the Air Board now requires very expensive technology to mitigate emissions from composting facilities, and so does the Water Board. And in order to be a good neighbor and not cause environmental justice impacts, that also has costs.
So how do you solve those?
All of these things cost money and we need to fund them. I don't think trying to compost, I actually have kind of changed my opinion on this over the years, to be honest. I used to be very frustrated that, again, when you're composting, you're held to a higher standard than somebody doing something much worse with the same material. Literally, the best thing you could do with the material from an environmental perspective, from a water quality perspective, and you would have the highest water quality regulations. And that seemed unfair, but truth is, we need to compost in a way that we don't have water quality impacts, that we don't affect neighbors, that we don't create environmental injustice. And it's all going to come down to this being a little bit more expensive than we originally were hoping for.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, by way of explanation, Commissioner Byer is the chair of the subcommittee that is tasked with shaping the report and the recommendation. It is true that the whole of the commission will review that work and have a discussion about it, but I think Commissioner Byer's questions are so pointed in part because he recognizes we're not likely to get another bite of the apple with you, so pardon the pun, that was really bad, but it's good to be able to ask you those questions now.
As you might be able to tell, I love this policy area, and you get as many bites of the apple as you want. I will fly anywhere in the state to talk about compost.
Let me ask, any other commissioners have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I want to thank you for your testimony. Thank you for taking time to be here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We'll now move on to a panel of 2 witnesses on grassroots community composting, an important way of diverting organic material and reusing that material. So I'll invite them to come up to the witness table and they will both speak. They are Monique Figueiredo and Michael Martinez. Ms. Figueiredo is the founder, owner, and CEO of Compostable LA, which she founded in 2019. She sees a need for additional community composting resources, and her vision for a community-led organization is woven through the fiber of Compostable's foundation. She has over 8 years of nonprofit experience in human services and has progressed from direct service to management, becoming an advocate for mental health funding and worker safety issues. She has since shifted to sustainability as her avenue to serve others. Michael Martinez is executive director of LA Compost. He has over 8 years of experience building gardens and compost systems throughout the county of Los Angeles and other parts of the country. He has grown LA Compost from a group of volunteers collecting organics with bicycles to a decentralized network of community compost hubs across the country's most populated county. He's also a former elementary school teacher and a certified master gardener. So Ms. Figueiredo will speak first, and then Mr. Martinez, and then we can take questions. Ms. Figueiredo.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm gonna just give you a little bit background on Compostable and then talk about some of our successes, some of our challenges, and where I see organizations like mine fitting into SB 1383. I welcome questions, but basically Michael's organization and my organization represent 2 arms of the community composting movement. So community composting aims to keep these things that we see as resources, which are organic material, as close to the generation as possible. And we prioritize environmental justice in locally based systems. And there's lots of different ways to be a community composter, but I would say that Michael focuses on drop-off programs and building infrastructure, whereas I focus on services. So ensuring that even if someone cannot get themselves to a drop-off program, they can still participate in the community composting movement, whether that's me picking up their food scraps or teaching them how to compost at home. So you'll hear more, I preface that because you'll hear more about the drop-off program and infrastructure in the city from Michael, and I'm gonna focus more on how I help people connect to those networks, even if they have busy schedules or, 3 jobs. So a little bit about Compostable. When I first moved here, I lived in one of LA's lovely large apartment complexes with no outdoor space, and I was used to composting in my backyard. So as Nick had illustrated, composting had become second nature to me. I really wanted to continue doing it, but there was no outdoor space for me to make that happen. I had started utilizing one of Michael's drop-off or LA Compost drop-off locations, the one that was closest to me, but that was still about a 15 to 20 minute drive. I had 3 jobs. I had there was 4 roommates in one of these apartments, so the amount of waste we were producing was tremendous, and I was the one that was gonna be bringing it. And so I was like, I cannot be going to this site every week. My schedule's too busy. And there was no pickup service. And there's lots of pickup services where I'm originally from in Boston. One's been operating for 10 years that does the same kind of service that I do. It's called Bootstrap Compost. And I was looking for that. I found one service. I found it pretty unreliable, kind of expensive. And so I decided that this would be something I offered to my community. And that was really, really scary. But I knew I wasn't the only one that wanted to be able to keep their resources local, but couldn't make use of the drop-off sites as often as I would like. And so Compostable was born from that. I started the research for Compostable in 2017, officially launched in 2019. And since 2019, I now have 11 employees. It started with just me and a Toyota Corolla. I used to say like, yeah, we'll get there. And it was me. And now I have 11 employees. And they're beautiful. They're just this wonderful team of people. We have close to 1,000 members, and we've diverted over 500,000 pounds of food scraps in just the past 3 years. And to give that some context, we might have close to 1,000 members now, but that first year we were launching, I think I had 20. And so this has grown exponentially since launching in 2019. And not only that, but we have a decentralized network of partners all within the city of LA, thanks to partnerships with LA Compost, Tawa Compost, LA Community Garden Council. So all these scraps can stay close to the neighborhoods in which they were produced in the first place. That's less wear and tear on the streets. That's more rebuilding of soils within the city. And then that soil can either stay there and grow produce and be sold at the farmer's market, or it can go back to our members. Maybe they're growing food in their backyard, The other thing that we have launched now, we started as just a pickup service, but now we're offering, consulting. Can we teach you how to compost at home? If the most sustainable thing to do is compost as close to the source as possible, then we should have people composting at home. So can we teach you how to compost at home? Can we help you manage your compost site at home? Can we educate, can we do workshops and educate people on that? Can we do on-site composting with kind of larger machines for these bigger restaurants that want to compost right on site and use that soil? So we've rolled out a whole series of offerings. And we also have a portion of our company that raises funding for environmental justice programming. So this funding, can go to nonprofits doing work in South LA or something like that, that we as a community have deemed important. So I'm gonna give you a little stats about our customer satisfaction. So 95% of customers say they've had an excellent experience with us. That's on a 1 to 5 rating. The majority rating 5. We had one person rate 3 and the rest were 4. We have no 1s or 2s on that rating. 98.8% said they would recommend us to their friends or their community. And really crucially, 60.9% had never composted before utilizing our services. So we see this as a pathway to helping people compost. And everybody who is a new member can attend office hours with me directly. I hold office hours every Friday. I can connect with our members directly, talk to them, answer their questions. We also host farm days twice a year where people can come out, see where the compost is being produced, really touch, feel, talk, smell, interact with that. And it's fostering that relationship. So there's a lot of transparency there. There's a lot of community connection, a lot of availability to me and us. And I just want to review a letter that was on one of our bins. Literally 30 minutes ago, my employee sent me this, and I was like, you know what, I'm reading it, that's it. They said, "Thank you for providing this service. Being a part of Compostable has helped me reduce my landfill trash, but more importantly, I've connected more to my cooking. Each scrap that goes in my bin reminds me of the energy cycles, and although small, connects me back to this city, so thank you." So that's a little bit about Compostable, our impact, and how we are engaging our members and how our members are engaging back with us. The reason I'm here giving testimony is because it hasn't been the easiest journey. There's only one Compostable right now in Los Angeles, and I would say that's heartbreaking to me. There should be more community composters doing my particular service. Because as Nick said, we need as many players as possible right now. So the reason there is only one Compostable is because their regulations have impacted our ability to grow. You know, every regulation and every bill comes with beautiful intent and, of course, understandably unintended consequences. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here to talk about some of the unintended consequences and maybe what we can do to rectify those so there can be more community composters. So in Los Angeles, waste is managed by 2 means. LA Sanitation manages the waste for residential sites, while franchise haulers manage the waste for commercial locations and apartment buildings. And what that has effectively done is close out the market for anybody else. So these RFPs were designed to get waste haulers. Well, I don't see myself as a waste hauler. I see myself as a community composter. I don't want to pick up trash or recycling. I want to pick up food scraps to turn into healthy soil for the agriculture industry. And so I would have no interest in applying to become a waste hauler. I don't want to be responsible for trash. And so this is a difficult position to be in because while I have a very niche focus, and while I can, because of that niche focus, connect very deeply with my members and community around composting and provide a high quality service and a high quality end product, it's actually closed me out of the market because I cannot legally operate without a franchised agreement. And you know, I spent years looking for loopholes on how I could operate and offer this service. But even with those in place, I find people are afraid to work with me because they don't want to get in trouble. You know, they have these franchised contracts already established. And so even if they align with maybe my values, the company's values, or the values of, you know, local, keeping resources local, they find that they cannot choose that option because of these franchise agreements.
So this touches upon your recommendations.
What?
What you are talking about touches upon
Yes,
the recommendations
yes.
you offered in your material.
Right, correct. So my recommendations for this, so the franchise agreements basically, they did good things, right? They made sure that 5 large trash trucks weren't coming down the same street. Of course, that's good. That's a lot of pollution. But there wasn't any carve out offered for community composters or small businesses trying to operate in this space. So one of my recommendations is that cities and counties should create either carve outs in their franchise agreements or exclusive contracts with community composters that allows us to legally operate in a city and allows customers to choose us should that be something they connect with. You know, and another thing I suggest is that right now, if someone wants to choose us, they still have to pay for their green bin service. Well, they should be incentivized to choose a community composter. It's a more sustainable option. It's less wear and tear in the city. It's less reliance on government resources. Why don't we incentivize them for choosing community composters? You know, if I can have all the metrics that prove they're in compliance with SB 1383, which I've had already for 3 years, shouldn't that be enough for them to meaningfully participate in this new organics law without being penalized for that? So that's a little bit about my experience. My biggest recommendation is, I would say, that diversity and redundancy in any ecosystem makes it stronger and it makes it more stable. Sole reliance on franchise agreements hinders that stability. It makes it more vulnerable. You know, as Nick was saying, you know, and I think he was so perfect to, you know, go up before us because he had that imagery of all the different players and all the different ways to get to this goal. And to lock people out of that market right now seems counterintuitive from the speed with which we need to operate.
Vice Chair Warner, I believe, has a question.
Sure.
I can make it work. You caught my attention on less reliant on governmental resources. So in these RFPs, is compost addressed in the RFPs with the waste, with the trash haulers?
From my understanding, right now, what the RFPs, how they were designed is, at least I can only speak from LA, is that the main service that needed to be provided was trash and recycling, and then the add-on service was the green bin. Now this is, you know, this is going to be mandating the green bin now, and what I'm saying is, you can have people use the green bin for whoever feels like that's meaningful for their lifestyle, but they should also be able to choose a community composter if that's what they would like to do.
And if they choose a community composter, is that something where that's a private transaction between a homeowner, let's say, or someone living in a residence and the community composter? Okay.
You know, I'm open to interpretation of how this could look. I just want to, I want community composters just to be included in the conversation. That's why this is such a meaningful experience for me alone. But it could be that the building manager, the business, or the resident contract with their community composter directly, or that maybe the community composter has their own agreements with the city or the county, and through that can offer the services.
By the way, in our community, a green bin is yard waste. So it's not
Right. Well, eventually with the SB 1383, right now it's still yard waste for a lot of LA residents. Eventually with SB 1383, it's going to be food waste too. And so, you know, that's why I'm here talking, is like, as you're planning SB 1383, please make sure that you know that not only does this kind of organization exist, there's a lot of people interested in it. And if I can do this much impact operating under a loophole in the law, imagine if I could just operate freely and not spend all my time advocating for community composting. I mean, the growth would be tremendous, and therefore the impact on composting in SB 1383 would be tremendous.
Thank you. I have Commissioner Byer, followed by Commissioner Aroner.
Sorry, I should have lowered my hand.
Oh, all right. Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you again. Commissioner Aroner.
So good morning. I'm really appreciating your testimony. So I live in the city of Berkeley.
Right.
So we have, you know, probably one of the oldest systems, right? But our
Right.
green bins are also for food waste. They're not just for pruning. But I'm a little confused. I'm confused about where the problem is. Is the problem with the state statute, or is the problem with local ordinances or whatever?
Right now, I would say the problem is with the way municipalities are rolling out their waste programs. Franchise agreements are being widely adopted across the country, but they mostly are adopted right now on the West Coast. And so I would have this recommendation that when the the state is telling people how to roll out programs or recommending how cities and counties can roll out programs, that they advocate for the importance of community composting in those rollouts. Whether that's like a carve out an exclusive franchise agreement where it's not like solely just this one waste hauler that can operate. Because my thought is, if you're going to be forced to pay for composting, because somebody has to pay for it, it's probably going to be the consumer. They should have a right to choose an option that maybe is more sustainable or in alignment with their values, and not be forced into just one option.
And, but my question, is there something in the state statute? Because we're going to have to make recommendations to the legislature, right, and to the administration. And the question is, does it prohibit it, or just
No,
doesn't?
SB 1383 does not directly prohibit community composting.
So it just doesn't, but it doesn't necessarily mention it either.
It does mention it, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
The focus has been primarily on, they use the word community composting hubs, and that's more focused on what Michael does.
Right.
And so it doesn't necessarily directly protect or promote community composting collection services. And I think a lot, what I've, put in the multi-tiered model you guys see in there, is that language is very specific, because then a lot of funding is being directed towards the build out of hubs, but hubs is not the only solution. I'm an incredibly motivated, sustainably minded person, and hubs were not working for my lifestyle. So I would encourage that definition to be broadened to all community composting options.
Okay, so then the next thing is that in my particular community, right, we, first of all, it's city employees who pick up our garbage,
Yeah.
which is unusual, I think, probably for most of the state of California at this point. But also I pay for garbage on my tax bill. I don't have a monthly bill. And so, but other communities do, right? I mean, I deal with, there's Waste Management, there's Recology, there are all of the different franchisors in Northern California that I'm aware of, who also, but it's a monthly bill, right? And it's a total bill, I think. It's not, it's for the gray bin, the red, the green bin and the blue bin, right? Actually, it's only usually, traditionally, it's been based just on what goes in the gray bin. That's been part of the problem, is that people, as they're reducing that bin, say to themselves, why am I paying more money, right? Not realizing that, guess what, composting and recycling does cost something, right?
Yeah.
We haven't educated the public very well on this at all, about what the game plan here is, right? But the question then becomes one of, as you what you're talking about is democratizing, at least in my mind, democratizing the management of waste. And so how do you see this in your head working, where as a taxpayer in Berkeley, I pay this all through my tax bill, right? And I all of a sudden decide I want to use an organization like yours. How does that all work? Have you thought about that yet?
I think you should get a tax credit, honestly. If you are composting at home completely or using a community composting service, I think there should be tax incentives to that. Or else what's incentivizing someone to compost at home if they have to pay this fee anyways for their green bin?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out
Right.
with you. It's what are those mechanisms, right? That are they realistic enough, right? That given how we pay currently for our garbage, whether it's through a franchisee or through a city, okay, that kind of thing. How do you break out of that?
Yeah.
Right, because it's hard to the implementation is a nightmare to think. I'm thinking of in my little community of 110,000 people, right? There are going to be 1,400 who want to do composting like you're describing.
Right.
And does that mean the city has to manage something with the tax collector, who's the county, okay, and all of that, to figure out how those 1,400 families come off of that bill and go onto your bill? It's that kind of stuff you're going to have to, it is complicated.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, one of the things that SB 1383 is pointing out is that there is no one solution, and every solution is complicated. If we solely rely on anaerobic digesters, there's complications there too. I mean, there's the potential for methane leaks. There's some of these things that you're talking about with biofuels. You still have to find a market for that. And so each option provided is going to have its own complications, but also each option provided will have its own strengths. And so maybe those 1,400 people are the most gung-ho composters you've ever met, and they're influencing their neighbors, and they're serving as drop-off sites, and that's less trucks, and that's less processing. And so I think it's important to consider that, like, there are mechanisms for this because we've done it in lots of different, solar, for example. The question is, which mechanisms do you want to use? In which complex systems are you willing to kind of lean into? And so I think that kind of comes back to some of the gumption that was being talked about, is that, and it's understandable, humans like the most simplest form directly, right? Because everything is so much all the time, but ecosystems don't work like that. Ecosystems are complex integrated systems. And I do think there is solutions. So I think, like, having tax incentives or tax write-offs or a discount on your bill or something like that, that encourages you to rely less on government resources and compost right at home, which is the most sustainable option, which maybe produces, you growing at home, which maybe educates your kids on the importance of recycling. That whole narrative is worth it. Do you have anything to contribute to that?
Maybe we could have an opportunity to hear from Mr. Martinez.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon in 3 minutes. I understand I'm the last speaker prior to lunch, so I'll make sure that I try to wrap up prior to 12:15. Prior to beginning, I just kind of want to share a little bit about myself. I am a product of Los Angeles County, born and raised here. Puente Hills landfill was my backyard. I come from, those who came before me really set the stage for me to be able to do what I do today. I come from a long line of carpenters, upholsterers, seamstress, farm workers, and people who just see things different. They don't see waste, but very much see resources around them. My father still to this day is an upholsterer, and he would take my brother and I around the street picking up broken furniture and dumpsters to reupholster them and make them the centerpiece of someone's living room. And in many ways, he introduced the form of composting at an early age, of just seeing things different. There is no such thing as a way. Things don't disappear, and where they go does in fact impact communities, both along the way as well as its final destination. So with that, I just want to share that I have had the joy, privilege, and honor of starting an organization called LA Compost nearly 10 years ago. In the same way that Monique started with a small car, I started with the bike and friends and families, and went to businesses, small restaurants, and piloted a program where we collected food scraps, composted in backyards, gave the material away for free, and built school gardens with the donations we received. That was 10 years ago, and it's grown quite significantly since. What we do today is really human-centered. We're community composters, and we focus on that first word just as much as the second, community and people, and restoring these lost connections that we've ruptured between ourselves and the soil. We at LA Compost create a decentralized network of community compost locations. We normalize compost, we demystify compost. Think of schools, churches, libraries, community gardens, housing projects, apartment complexes, art centers, museums, anywhere where there's life, food, and the ability to tell the full story of food. We come alongside and create those connections. We hire from within the community, because what better people facilitating these work than the individuals who are born and raised from those areas, have seen the changes, have built the partnerships in those areas. And now we are a team of 20, mobilizing and diverting nearly over 2 million pounds of organics on an annual basis, all using community-based infrastructure. Composting affects us all. It doesn't matter what we believe, how we look, where we live. We all breathe, we all drink, and we all eat. And the soil affects all three of those things in a major way. And as we've heard previously from both Monique and Nick, that there's a huge issue at hand in regards to just sending things away. It's a very robotic, isolated transaction that takes place when we put something in a bin and assume it's going somewhere good. But I'd encourage us all, if we have not yet visited a landfill, to just go. Perhaps not on a date or a family outing, but visit a landfill, and let's just see the enormity and the mass of what our issue is. There is an issue of consumption and release and throwing away, assuming that it's out of sight, out of mind. But where infrastructure is being built is an issue as well that we would also want to raise. It's often impacting specific communities more than others. And what I think we have an opportunity to do here is reimagine the good of what infrastructure can be and the positive nature of composting, not just a backyard in the shadow activity, front yard, side yard, school, everywhere where you do life, compost is normalized, appreciated, and celebrated. We've really grown over the past 10 years. We really focus on individual, community, and regional approaches. We have farmers market food scrap drop-off programs similar to the city of New York. We have soil farmer training programs where we train people on the importance of composting and gardening. Obviously, the pandemic affected us all different, but when we are asked to quarantine, that is very different for someone who has no yard, who has no space or square footage to freely roam. So how do we meet them where they are at to create equitable resources and opportunities for them to engage in the full story of food and understanding how resources can be reallocated? I'm a former elementary school teacher. I taught 5th grade reading and writing for 3 years. And to me, best teachable moments were when you were able to give a student the space and opportunity and access to put what was learned into practice. There's one thing about speaking, there's another thing about learning by doing and allowing for those lived experiences to take place. And that is what we do as community composters, both Monique and I, and so many others across the state and the country. And I kind of want to just speak on the ability to reimagine how we do this work. I appreciate Nick's slide in regards to all solutions are needed. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's beautiful networks that are below the ground. The best way to explain it is our internet or robust freeway systems in LA County. But the magic underneath the ground are these mycorrhizal fungal kingdoms of this beautiful soil food web where information is shared, resources are given, and there's this strong connectivity and strength in the diversity and complexity of that system. I believe we have an opportunity to do that very thing above the ground. We live in the most populous county in the country here in LA, where there's over 10 million of us who call LA home. And we are trying to establish a human network of individuals like Monique, municipal haulers, folks like LA Compost and small business owners, where we're establishing a robust human network that is doing good, that is sharing resources, that is connected, and the strength is in the many versus the one singular isolated approach. We've been able to tease this out at our public parks, at our community gardens, at our city spaces, and we very much want to reimagine where compost can take place. The advantage that we have operating on the scale in which we operate is our ability to move and build, create, and develop infrastructure at a very quick pace. We're talking about a community garden or a park that can be built and established in 3 months, offering several jobs, diverting hundreds of thousands, if not million pounds of organics, all kept local. When a tree drops its leaf, it does so by design. It doesn't ask us to rake, leaf blow, put it in a bag, and send it far away. It knows how to survive because it's a tree. It drops its leaf, it decomposes at the root zone, and it feeds the microbes that really give it life. And how are we mimicking that in the complex environments across the state of California? Of course we need municipal haulers, of course we need city agencies, but we need everyone. How are we not going to include the why, as Nick mentioned? The why is the purpose, the why is the reason, the why is why people are actually going to engage and want this program to be better. And I'd encourage us to really focus on that why. This work is really thinking beyond ourselves. I really love the phrase in which we talk about planting trees whose shade we will never sit in. And that's what we're doing when we're responding to climate emergency. This climate emergency and crisis that we're in is going to transcend all of our lifetimes. And I have a 3 and a 5-year-old that I think about, and what city, what county, what state are they going to be left with? What are we actually going to do? And not just have a cliche phrase of let's leave it better than when we received it, but let's create thriving ecosystems. Let's create complexity and diversity and take the time to tease out these many ideas. Some of the requests for support that I would like to see personally, and I also just want to kind of highlight and shout out the inner workings that we're working here in Los Angeles. We are working with CalRecycle. We are finally starting to see crumbs of funding come our way, and I'm hoping that's extended to small businesses like Monique as well. But the Community Composting for Green Spaces, we helped facilitate over 130 locations from Sacramento to San Diego to implement community composting efforts. There is now a round 2 that we are going to help dictate and facilitate as well. We were listed as a key partner in the mayor's Green New Deal for the city of Los Angeles. hoping to work with LA Sanitation and LA Rec and Parks on expanding, as Monique mentioned, food scrap drop-offs across all farmers markets, building local infrastructure across regional parks to ensure that when we're collecting food scraps, they don't have to travel more than 5 miles to be processed. I'd like to see an expansion in regulatory permissions to include community composting in most parks. Right now, the way the tiers work there's a community compost tier, there's a notification tier, and there's a commercial tier. There's really nothing in between. We have an incredible opportunity to compost within our parks because we've seen it happen in DC, New York, Philly, and other major cities. And LA should not have to follow. We have an opportunity to innovate. California has an opportunity to innovate. Speaking within LA specifically, LA County has more than 70,000 acres of parkland. LA City has over 17,000 acres of parkland. We are talking about green space that is equitable, that is inclusive, that allows for innovative recreation to take place, for composting to also take place. We recently launched Griffith Park last September, one of the largest urban parks in the country, 4,400 acres, where we are composting, establishing jobs, giving that compost back to Parks Department, and really combating the climate crisis on the ground. I'd also like to see an increase in equity-based consideration, specifically with government funding. It's easy for government funding to take on the approach of equality versus equity. It's easy to give every region across California the same money, when in reality, Los Angeles County has the majority of folks living in California. There's a round 2 of funding for community composting, where LA includes Orange County, Santa Barbara, and Ventura, equating to over 14.5 million people. You have another region which has less than 200,000 people, yet the resources will be the same, and that is not equitable in my opinion. We're not looking at population, we're not looking at priority communities who are impacted by this environmental crisis, and we're not looking at cost of living. I think we need to just take a little bit of time to reimagine and reflect on our methodology of how funds are dispersed. In addition to most funds, they are on a reimbursement basis. Most nonprofits and community-led groups are not able to function on a $500,000 grant with it having a 90-day reimbursement factor to it. You want community groups to do good. You want to encourage the youth in the next generation, but for them to have liquid cash flow of $500,000 available at hand is not realistic. And then my third point is increased synergy around collaboration with large-scale haulers, municipal agencies, and RFP providers, similar to what Monique mentioned. It's not a us or, it's a both and situation. Both can work in harmony, both can coexist well, and it's just a matter of coming to the table and identifying what we both do well. Community composters are great at working with community, great at being transparent, great at creating restorative practices. Haulers are great at capacity, logistics, having the ability to process way more than we will ever be able to process in our lifetime. But there is room for collaboration. There is an opportunity for carve-outs, for micro-hauling, for both to exist, and not so much a competitive who's going to destroy the other, but a collaborative of we're working towards the same thing. If there's a strip mall or an apartment complex that is hard for a large truck to get to, why couldn't a community group like Monique service that and provide the diversion numbers and provide the reporting to it? If there's an opportunity for the RFP to have teachable workshops and community engagement, why couldn't organizations like Monique and ours lead those and work with those? It doesn't have to be exclusive. Compost is not exclusive. I think the beauty of compost is the inclusive nature of it. It literally celebrates the diversity and complexity of its ingredients. It literally wants all these things to come together, to die to their old self, and it literally does not celebrate its finished product. The very nature of compost is to give itself away, to allow for the next thing to thrive, to grow and survive. And what we are trying to do as community compost is just mimic that. How do we include communities? How do we include voices? How do we include decision makers and people in positions of power to perhaps decompose old systems that aren't working well and reimagine what is in fact possible? So I do want to thank you for your time today. This is an incredibly important opportunity for us to recognize that history very much has its eyes on us, and we have an ability to create something beautiful as we've already started. The first domino has fallen over, and I'm encouraged for those that will fall after. But my hope and my desire is for us to really not forget the constituents and the communities and the people who we're actually trying to serve in California. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, and I see Commissioner Garcetti.
First, thank you both very much for coming and for the preparation that you obviously took in coming before us. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, a question for you first. Are we doing okay time-wise? Are we on schedule?
You know, we write our own schedule.
Okay. I'm the newest member, you can tell, so okay, just looking at it. Let me ask two questions then to both of you, and either one can respond. The first question is, have you been working with schools or school districts? And if so, tell us a little bit about that. And secondly, and this you can answer first, if there are representatives of the waste haulers who were here and they were thinking, really appreciate their effort, but it's not a good idea for the following reasons. What are the reasons that they bring forward that you've heard that may or may not have merit, but it's a legitimate concern that they may have?
You go for it. No.
Awesome.
You're gonna
Cool.
go like that.
So
I'm
I'll
so
start-
glad I don't have to follow him. My
I'll sta-
goodness.
I'll start with the school question. So I was a former teacher, so the very nature of LA Compost started in the classroom. Kids asking, how do Cheetos grow? Asking where things came from in regards to disconnect. But in LA Unified, one of the largest school districts in the country, we very much work with them. It's a little difficult in regards to just being able to establish significant protocols and processes on campus. One of the things that we really encourage specifically with schools are the share tables, because a student will take everything, eat one thing, and then throw everything away. Whereas a kid might be coming to school hungry, knowing that that's their only 2 meals for the day, would love to take additional apples, carrots, and applesauce home. So we're really encouraging food recovery and edible food recovery first, prior to composting.
They're composters of the future.
Correct. With that being said, we are at every elementary, middle, high school, and college level, campus level. And the way we do it is after school programs, paid internships, or outdoor classroom educations. In South Central Los Angeles, we have a specific school that both Monique and I support called Carver Middle School. And the individual who manages that program used to go to that school. He's from that neighborhood. He knows the individuals by name. And there's community-based programming, not only for the students, but for the neighbors, for partner organizations. And it's incredible to allow a student to see the full story of food. They bite into an apple and they don't want it. That's not the end of the apple's life. It goes into the worm bin or the compost bin. It turns into compost. It goes back to that next cycle, whether it's going to be corn, amaranth, or whatever they're growing, and it clicks. It's aha moment. And the best form of education is teaching a child to go back to their home and tell their parents, why aren't you doing this? You can have the most beautiful infographic in the most language appropriate way, but if my 5-year-old checks me and says, Dad, why are you throwing that away? Like, that's good. Like, it's hard for a parent to tell their kid, oh, you're kind of stuck and you got your tongue, you know? So the question is, yes, we're working with schools. Obviously, from Berkeley, we have Martin Luther King, Alice Waters. We have so many incredible California-based rooted curriculum on food justice and climate emergency response. To your second question, which I would want to allow Monique to speak to as well, if you'd like, I want to say the haulers, I can't speak for them, but hypothetically speaking, perhaps their response would be, it's not enough. Their metrics are cute, or that's a fad or a hobby, but I want to make sure that we're focused on, like, we're not metrics driven only, we're qualitative data driven as well. One of the issues haulers have is contaminants, buy-in, community participation, lack of interest. That's where we come up. That's where the kids are preaching the gospel of compost to their parents. That's where people see, oh, I dropped off at the farmer's market or the church or the school or the library or the PTA meeting. We've normalized compost enough to benefit the inevitable haulers' buy-in and participation. So as I think both are needed, I think haulers perhaps would say our capacity is not enough. And that's true if you're looking at us versus them. But I want to look beyond just processing capacity and look more so to the strength of human engagement and the ability to have individuals on the ground showcasing the benefits and establishing that buy-in, minimizing contamination, allowing for the why to really be rooted. When we have a glass bottle, we know we're looking for a blue bin. But when we have food, after the table experience, there's no dialogue. It's just trash because we assume there's no value there. So I believe our greatest strength is that why, is that transparency, is the boots, hands, and feet on the ground.
Yeah, I would second everything Michael said. I would say for schools, I think the best type of system for a school is on site. How often do kids get to experience the full cycle of something? It's rare and it's special, and it's really connecting that to them. As far as the haulers, I would say, one thing maybe is there, like, you couldn't keep up with the regulations. And I would say, I hope I'm not as regulated as a large waste hauler. There's a reason Amazon's more regulated than your local bodega. There's a larger impact potential there, negative and positive. And so I would say that if contracts are being made with community composters, they should be made in partnership with them. So we're not paying the same franchise fees or, having to fill out the same kind of permits, because there's inherently less risk involved just because it's such a smaller scale. And that's just, I didn't want to repeat what Michael said. I would say that's an additional thing. But I would also say that, in a time when people, feel so disempowered and disconnected, I've had members reach out to me to ask them for, like, do you know any lawyers that help with nonprofits? It has nothing to do with composting, but they've formed a relationship with me, they trust me, and it's formed some kind of community for them. I can't imagine anybody ever reaching out to maybe a waste hauler, to ask that kind of question. And I'm sure the waste hauler would happily answer, but that's just not the nature of their relationship. So I think there's a lot of benefit to the empowerment that comes from these kind of community building programs.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I see Commissioner Byer, and I'd like for us to conclude this part of our presentation by 12:30. Please, Commissioner. You're muted. David, you're muted.
Okay. I'm showing a book here, which is called Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, edited by Paul Hawken of Smith and Hawken. And as an individual, what he did was hired the best researchers in the world to come up with a plan to deal with climate and global warming. And one of the proposals is to deal with organic waste. And I think, as an earlier witness talked about, the education of consumers, not as ratepayers, but as participants. And I think the really heroic testimony we've just heard is a great example of telling a narrative. And the first witness used slides, and the acronym was SUCCESS. But I think there's another way of spelling that out, which is a simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional story. And what our witnesses from Los Angeles have done is they've given us the narrative and the direction to help educate the public so that we do not end up in another situation where government is distrusted because government is imposing something that taxpayers or ratepayers don't want. And the point that Commissioner Garcetti elicited about education is vital in that regard. Convincing people that forest fires or flooding of airports or things that we've, as the Little Hoover Commission, have done in the past are all around mitigating the effects of global warming. And so getting everybody to participate exactly in the way that our witnesses have talked about is important, both for them and for the smaller scale activities, but also to justify the larger work that has to be done by state agencies and large entities. So I want to thank the witnesses for what they've said, what they do, and I wish them best in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner Byer.
Thank you.
Turning to, I see no further questions by commissioners. Thank you both for taking the time to help us with our task. The information that you provided, I think, is going to be extremely instructive and very, very helpful in crafting both the report and the recommendations. And I appreciate that both of you offered recommendations in your written testimony that we've received and reviewed. So please, again, thank you, and best of luck and continued success.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we will now take a break in the hearing on this topic. The commission will hold a business meeting in the small room immediately behind the dais. The members of the public are welcome to attend if they wish. We won't be discussing organics, but we'll be discussing commission business. We'll reconvene this hearing at 1:30 with witnesses from local government. Do you want to do 1:15? We'll try 1:15? Okay.
Will of the commission, 1:15, does that work? Yeah,
Okay.
1:15.
We'll reconvene at 1:15.
Well, welcome, everyone. I see Commissioner Byer is there, and I'm assuming all the other commissioners are present, accounted for, and available. So with that, it is now 1:25, and let's resume with our hearing on organic waste recycling, part 1. And Ethan, if you'd be so kind as to do the honors with respect to our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this afternoon, we will be hearing from 3 different witnesses with regard to local government perspectives on implementing SB 1383. We will begin with Barbara Romero, who's the Director and General Manager of LA Sanitation. She is also joined by Alex Halou, who is the Assistant Director of the Solid Resources Program Development of LA Sanitation. If I may, let me introduce Ms. Romero, and then she'll testify, and then we'll be ready for questions. As I mentioned, she is the Director and General Manager at LA Sanitation. She was appointed Deputy Mayor of City Services by Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti in March of 2015. In this role, she ensured that the mayor's priorities are implemented by 15 departments, representing thousands of workers and more than $5 billion in annual budgets. She has prior experience as a commissioner on the city's Board of Public Works, overseeing the Bureau of Sanitation, a city planning commissioner, chief of urban projects and watershed planning for the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, and the Los Angeles Conservation Corps, running a federal AmeriCorps jobs program in Los Angeles. In recognition of her work, Ms. Romero has received numerous awards from the California Junior Chamber of Commerce Foundation, Mexican American Opportunity Foundations, and more. Ms. Romero.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you. It's good to have a friendly face here with Mr. Garcetti. I'm here to share the progress that the city has made under the leadership of Mayor Eric Garcetti to reduce greenhouse gases and to implement policies designed to make LA a zero-waste city as we prepare to host the World Cup in 2026 and the Olympics in 2028. As we strive to educate Angelenos about preventing food waste and how to not only recycle organic waste, but why organic recycling, why it matters not only to the city, but to the state of California. For over 25 years, LA San has been at the forefront of organic recycling for over 750 residential customers and 65,000 commercial and multifamily accounts handled by our franchise haulers. We're on the path to achieving compliance on many of the SB 1383 elements. This coming week alone, we're increasing our food scraps and our green material from 18,000 to 40,000 residential, with the goal of, by the end of the year, getting 750 residential accounts in the books. We are partnering to recover edible food and directed communities in need in the coming year. We're also establishing food drops at over 30 farmers markets in partnership with LA Compost, who was here earlier. The challenge, though, that we are facing are tremendous. Annually, we divert 700,000 of organics and recyclables from landfills, the largest amount in the country. And to comply with SB 1383, we will need to divert an additional 1.2 million tons by 2028. To support the additional 1.2 million tons, we'll need new and modified infrastructure to increase our education and our outreach and acquire procurement of compost and mulch. The policies we will need to implement all these policies, we will need additional financial support. To reduce the financial impact on our ratepayers, I was told by City Council just a couple months ago, before they would pass the budget, that especially since COVID had a severe impact on not only our city residents, but our businesses. Many of our businesses, as you know, have been shut down and are still being impacted, especially our restaurants and our small businesses. So with that, it's been hard for them to, it's harder for those businesses to comply with the state regulations. The Little Hoover Commission is a critical and influential body, and you can be of significant support to us at the City of Los Angeles. You can support the establishment and maintenance of a local composting infrastructure for the conversion of existing green waste processing facilities into full organic processors. What this really means is, how do we make sure we exempt some of the CEQA process for some of our existing or upgrading our facilities? Second, we would urge you to petition the state legislature for jurisdictional assistance based on population or other metrics to provide subsidies for a number of years for these as these new services are being implemented to smooth out the big adjustment to our in the service rate structures. You can also help us assist in asking for businesses to subscribe to organics collection by not penalizing, but providing financial incentives, especially to mid-size and small-size businesses. We also would like, need funding for outreach and education. Estimated alone in City of Los Angeles, we need $5 million just to launch our new program. $1 million ongoing outreach is cost for the City of LA on an annual basis. We also encourage support for additional edible and food recovery organizations to help us address food insecurity so that cities and municipalities don't have to do it alone. And we also would ask that you consider financial assistance to cover costs to develop and implement the monitoring and inspection program as directed by CalRecycle. We think that could be a jobs program. We deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and your leadership role that you play here at the Little Hoover Commission, and will continue to play here in our region, and we're here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Byer.
You're muted, Commissioner Byer.
Sorry. Thank you for your testimony and your incredible prior public service. I want to go back to a question about anticipating problems, and I think your testimony does a very good job of posing the tension, if you will, between an admirable goal and the execution difficulties. And if we could maybe differentiate between operating expenses and capital expenses, if you had a magic wand, what's a reasonable cost estimate for the state in capital expenditures for additional facilities or infrastructure to implement the law and get to the goal that the legislature set? Is it 100 million? Is it 5 billion? I'm just looking for a breadbox kind of answer.
So I'll simplify it this way. Thank you for the question, and also that we do need to distinguish between operating costs and capital costs. And if you look at what trash, taking our trash to our landfills right now costs $40. So if we're gonna process our organics, it costs over 100. So yeah, so that alone, if you could just look at that number, and that is a significant difference. And the burden that we have to impose on the ratepayers is not justifiable, especially during these times where, COVID is still before us. And for example, LA Sanitation hasn't gone back to our rate, for a new rate increase in over 10 years. So that is just alone to just process our trash is gonna have to increase, but with the organic waste, that is significant. So I don't have an answer for you, but I could tell you what it's costing us to process, so we could get to a number.
So I'm sorry, the $40 is,
So it's over twice, you know,
right, is the $40 per ton? Is that what you're referencing?
yes. Yes.
Okay. So there's the capacity question on the capital side, but again, based on work done by the Little Hoover Commission staff, isn't it also the case that some permits have been delayed or made infeasible as a result of Air Resource Board judgments or calls with respect to the consequences on carbon dioxide or other things that make it even more problematic?
I would say from our perspective, that's why I'm asking for looking at, you know, if we upgrade these facilities, like we have Lopez Canyon, for example, that we process our green waste, but if we want to add processing for, you know, our food waste, our food scraps, we are going to have to go back to the, you know, to the air quality board, to the regional water quality board. So the amount of permits that will be required will not only delay, but increase the costs of our processing. And it is in a neighborhood, in a residential area. So how do we look at these as added community benefits? And, you know, if we are going to address climate change, working and coordinating with the other agencies, the permit agencies, is going to be critical in making sure we implement these aggressive and much needed climate, you know, goals that we need to do. But I don't think that was contemplated when this was passed.
So this sounds to me, at least, like a slow motion car crash. And are there steps the legislature or the governor should consider with respect to either slowing the implementation of certain mandates on certain size businesses or types of businesses to mitigate the cost or the potential rate increase for taxpayers?
I think, you know, for City of Los Angeles, a phased approach is definitely something we've encouraged and requested. And, but if you want to incentivize it, you know, with, you know, how we've had COVID relief programs where businesses that qualify, and we could create some parameters in the city, you know, working with our franchise haulers, we could tell you who's signed up for organics and who hasn't signed up. And it's very clear that it's based on, you know, the kind of the kind of business it is. And we know restaurants is one area that is much in need, and they produce a lot of organic. So is that somewhere to target restaurants where we know they could use the financial support, but they also produce, you know, organics? The multifamily would be one that, you know, are we going to produce as much organics, or should we look at phasing that out or putting, you know, the deadline on that further out?
Well, given that we're in year 6 of implementing this law, what has been the concrete outputs from conversations between either state and or local government and, let's pick 2, restaurant trade associations and or owners of multi-resident housing? Where are we in terms of that conversation so that there can be kind of a consensual progress?
So today's my anniversary. Today is my first year being the director and general manager of LA Sanitation. So I could tell you my conversations with Cal Recycle have been very productive and very constructive. I think it's a matter now of, and they're supportive and understanding that they are, you know, we are facing all the cities, especially big urban cities like Los Angeles. So they have been working with us. I have not personally, I know at the state level, they've been working with the associations, but I don't have firsthand experience. I heard that they were looking at putting some money in the budget for kind of an incentive program to support cities, but I don't know that for sure. But Alex Halou, who's the assistant director who has been here in the past 6 years, can give you more background than I have.
Okay, just with respect to restaurants and multifamily housing, those are very large economic drivers. And to the extent they become dissenters from implementation, it will cause a bunch of knock-on effects. And so what I'm trying to figure out is there something that we should be looking at in terms of bringing people together, either tax credits or grant programs or anything of that nature?
I mean, I think the couple things. The cost of landfilling versus organics composting is humongous. So that delta need to be reduced. Couple things. If we're trying to set up a facility in the city of Los Angeles right now, a 700 tons a day facility, we would need about $100 million just to put that facility in place, get the permits and the equipment. Many of the multifamily that you pointed out to are really under rent control and they need subsidy. And so we do like to see funding coming in to the city, whether it's in the form of grants or any other means, so that we can subsidize the cost of the collection and the cost of processing the material. We all know that the longer we wait on this process, the more greenhouse gases we're going to be emitting from the landfill. To reduce that, we really need to move into composting, whether it's windrow or we enclose the facilities, which we are heading towards in the city of Los Angeles. But that delta cannot be borne alone by the residents and the ratepayers that we have. That's why we're looking for subsidy. Scale-wise, in the city, sanitation alone, we collect 1,700 tons a day of green waste that's currently collected, processed, and the cost for that processing is about $45 to $50. Now, when we add food scrap to it, we're gonna have to meet the SB 1383, we'll be moving from 1,700 to 3,000 tons a day. The 3,000 tons a day, now the cap increased to about $100, $120 to process that material. Many of the facilities are located outside the city. So in order to reduce our GHG, the emissions, we are putting 30 farmers markets, locations at 30 farmers market where residents could take their material. We're doing education to do backyard composting. We are providing subsidies if you do backyard composting because you can get the bin at a reduced price if you live in the city of Los Angeles. But even with all the stuff we're doing, we are looking at a humongous 1.2 million tons that have to be taken out of a landfill and into something else where we could beneficially use it. Right now, with the green waste that we process, we give it back to our residents. They could use it on their lawn. They can pick it, we can deliver in some instances for them so beneficially. But when we add the 1.2 million, now we have to purchase a lot of this product back, because that's one of the procurement elements of SB 1383. So our council and our mayor has been very aggressive on the GHGs, but also we do need the help of the state. I believe the $180 million that was in the legislation is really a drop in the bucket, because LA, for example, allocation would be close to be 14 to 16 million. In LA alone, we would need about $400 to $500 million to implement these programs and to be successful. And education is very crucial because we have to go house to house, educate everybody what goes in the bin. And we really do not want to make the same mistakes we did in the recycling. Recycling, we did a great job in the beginning, but we were shipping a lot of our products to China. And when that one shut down, you saw what happened with the recycling industry. So right now, our goal, as the Director Romero mentioned, is really to go and educate the residents about the benefits. The program we started before the pandemic was 18,000 homes. Mayor Garcetti was a big champion of that one. The 18,000 homes, we wanted to learn how the people behavior are gonna change. We also educated them is to manage what you're purchasing. So we start with food reduction first. So as you go to supermarket, don't buy 7 heads of lettuce if you only need 1 or 2, just buy what you need. So basically, we try to control how much material coming in, the feed stream in. So this way, at the back end, we have less organic to deal with.
Thank you.
Yeah, before we leave this, so I was struck by the $40 per ton, and then when the organics are included, it goes to 100. That's the numbers I heard. Did I hear that right or not?
Correct.
Okay, good. Now, if you can explain to me, because I don't know anything about this, what happens between the 40 and that, whatever you're collecting there, and the 100? What adds another $60 per ton? What is it that,
It's easy. You take a landfill, right? You just take a location. You have to go through the CEQA, EIRs. In the city, we require them to even go even further by putting liners, clay layers, and so forth, right? So all that cost comes into about 40 because you open a big hole in the ground, call it what it is, you put the material, you cover it every day. And by the way, in the city of Los Angeles, we outlawed using ADC. This is the green material from our waste to be used. So you have to use liners, you have to use soil, whatever, to cover that and capture the emissions. Now, if you want to, now you have to start a new facility that's able to process the material. So you have to coming in, you have to clean it, go through a sort line, pick up the trash or whatever contaminants out of it, and determine whether it's recyclable or it's compostable, whatever. You go through this process. Now you have to put it in windrows or enclosed facility where it has to cure for about 60 to 120 days, depending on the process. Or if it's another, and then that material, when it leaves, now you have to handle it. You have to give it to farmers, to residents, to do something with it. We were the first in the state to invest to help support the anaerobic digestion down in Paris, in the city of Paris. And for them to kick off the ground,
California.
Yeah, Paris, California. So to kick off the ground, they have to take the material, go through the process, put it through a digester with 20-something days. Then the material has to go out, cured, place it. So it requires multiple handling, multiple transportation. Versus if you have a landfill, you just put it in, close it.
got it. So everything associated with handling the organics is much more complicated than whatever you're doing with a landfill. So that explains the difference between the 40 to 100.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, you still have required in the landfill to put gas collection system, recover the leachate, treat them, and all the stuff before you can discharge them. But the complexity and the handling of the organics is significantly more.
Right. Well, that also, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that for the city of Los Angeles, we've had green bins for 25 years. So everyone says, you're already doing it. Yes, we are. But it's the additional processing and that's going to happen in that. It's also going to include more staff now because now we're going to have two different processes to take it out and address to achieve the goal that we want.
Right, and that also helps to explain in the background memo that staff prepared the challenges for rural districts that have a much smaller population base. So in a community like Los Angeles with the dramatic numbers of people, it's expensive, and if you were to pass that on to your ratepayers, it would represent a certain number. But if you're passing that on to a community that has 10,000 people, that's why you're looking at a 90% increase in a rural county. Okay, I get it. Thank you. Yeah, of course, Commissioner Emerson.
Yes. What facility does LA get involved with in the city of Paris? What you were talking about Paris? I didn't understand that.
In the city of Paris, there was established the first anaerobic digestion in the state. It was a thermal process. Actually, I'm sorry, it's a fermentation process that they use the green material and food waste that goes into the digester. It's a German technology that was brought into the state of California, and that's the only one so far I'm aware of in the state.
Yeah, Santa Barbara has something similar, anabolic digester. You're cooking the stuff, and then you're trying to figure out how to generate energy off of it, and then deal with the gases. Any other commissioners have questions? All right. Did you complete your presentation? I thought, okay.
Yes,
I thought you did.
I was here with just more, wanted to be brief so that you can have an opportunity to ask us questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Chairman, we will now move on to the second panel this afternoon. And I'll wait for the witnesses to come up as they come up. So this panel will involve both Sharon Green from Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts and Coby Skye, rather, I apologize, from Los Angeles County Public Works. Sharon Green is the Legislative and Regulatory Programs Manager at Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts, where she has worked for 30 years. She leads the Sanitation District's efforts related to state and federal legislation and works on various policy issues. She is the current chair of the state and federal legislative and regulatory committees for numerous wastewater and solid waste associations. She is joined by David Rothbard, who is the division engineer for the air quality engineering section of LA County Sanitation Districts, and by William Chen, the supervising engineer of the solid waste energy recovery engineering section. Then we will hear from Coby Skye. He is the deputy director for environmental services for the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works. He has responsibility for the environmental programs, sewer maintenance, and fleet management business areas, as well as the internal risk management and employee health and safety office. With an annual budget of more than $3.6 billion and a workforce of 4,000 employees, Los Angeles County Public Works is the largest municipal public works agency in the United States, providing services to more than 10 million people across 4,000 square miles. Skye is also a licensed professional engineer in the state of California. So we'll start with Ms. Green and then Mr. Skye. Ms. Green.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Nava and members of the commission. I'm pleased to be here. My name is Sharon Green. He already introduced me, so I will dispense with that. I will talk today, I will tell you a little bit about the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts, show you some facilities we're using. I'll give you a little mini tour just to show you some pictures of what some of the facilities look like with our food waste recycling project, and discuss the role of the wastewater sector in helping solve some of these problems and achieve the goals of SB 1383, and then wrap up with a few conclusions and recommendations. Next slide. So hopefully this will also kind of fill in some gaps, as well as kind of maybe add a few layers to your understanding based on what some of the previous speakers and discussion has been. So the sanitation districts are comprised of 24 different districts served by one staff. We provide wastewater and solid waste services to about 5.5 million people in 78 cities and unincorporated areas in Los Angeles County. A core part of the sanitation district's mission is to convert waste into resources such as recycled water, energy, and recycled materials. I also want to mention we have a somewhat unique governance arrangement by statute. The mayors of the 78 cities that we serve and the chair of the Board of Supervisors serve on our boards of directors. As shown on the map, we have 11 different wastewater treatment facilities. We also operate 2 landfills, own and/or operate 3 materials recovery and transfer facilities, or MRFs, and we own or co-own 2 composting facilities. We also produce about 75 megawatts of renewable electricity at our solid waste and wastewater facilities, which is enough to supply the needs, or the equivalent of, to supply the needs of about 75,000 homes. As I mentioned today, I will focus on our food waste recycling program, but I also wanted to mention that at several of our facilities, we divert several other types of organic waste for composting or recycling, including green waste, biosolids, paper, and cardboard. So I won't really get into any of that today due to time. Next slide. So we began our journey in 2014, and we began exploring development of a food waste project to co-digest pre-processed food waste with wastewater solids using the existing digesters that we have at our large treatment facility in the city of Carson. Why did we do that? Well, there were several external drivers, such as AB 32, Cal Recycle's Organic Waste Roadmap, AB 1826, which mandated commercial organic recycling, that was enacted in 2014, and then that was followed by SB 1383 in 2016. And then, of course, CARB has adopted the short-lived climate pollutant strategy. You heard about that earlier. So these policies, were kind of progressing along and made us think a lot about what would happen to the existing solid waste facilities and programs that we operated, how the local businesses, cities, and county would comply with these new organic waste mandates, and what our role could be going forward. Internally, the factors that made food waste to energy seem like a natural direction included the fact that we had both infrastructure and expertise in solid waste, wastewater, and energy recovery. We felt that anaerobic co-digestion of wastewater and processed food waste was the obvious choice for us, and we determined that we would have enough capacity in the existing digesters at our Carson facility for this approach to work. We also felt we could make a meaningful contribution to meeting the needs of our local jurisdictions while also advancing our mission to convert waste into resources. Next slide. So at the big picture, this graphic kind of illustrates the logic of including wastewater co-digestion in the mix of the different pathways for managing organic waste, and in this case, particularly for food waste. Wastewater co-digestion reduces fossil fuel-based greenhouse gas releases in two ways. First, by minimizing methane releases from landfills, as you've heard, and then second, by displacing fossil fuels with non-fossil fuel, renewable, low carbon intensity biogas made from waste. An analysis designed to answer the question of how much of a role wastewater facility co-digestion can play was commissioned by the State Water Resources Control Board several years back, and the final report was released in June 2019. This co-digestion capacity report found that existing anaerobic digesters at wastewater treatment facilities in California, so this is statewide, not just us, can potentially accept all of the divertible food waste in California, or an estimated 3.4 million tons per year. I believe that was projected out to 2030 at that level of food waste. This level of co-digestion would, of course, result in a major increase in biogas production at these facilities, which will need to be beneficially utilized. So this finding has taken on new importance as recognition has grown that due to stringent air quality regulations and the need for both the South Coast Air Basin and the San Joaquin Valley to undertake aggressive measures to meet federal ozone standards, it may be impossible for new or expanded composting facilities to be developed to meet the demand being created by SB 1383. If that is the case, then anaerobic digestion at wastewater facilities may become an even more critical key to achieving some of the goals of SB 1383. Next slide. So this slide summarizes the different components of our food waste recycling program and what goes in and out of each step. Anaerobic digestion produces biogas, which is a resource that can be converted into a number of different products, including renewable electricity, heat, transportation fuel, and pipeline quality biomethane. At this time, we generate electricity, heat, and transportation fuel. We are currently exploring options for future phases that may include low carbon biomethane injection into the common carrier pipeline system. Next slide. So the next few slides will showcase some of the equipment that we have recently installed as part of our food waste program. This is the food waste processing area in the Puente Hills MRF, which is a fully enclosed indoor facility. We use a food processing system known as a DOTA system. This system can process up to 160 tons per day of incoming food waste. However, we are currently processing about 45 tons per day. This system was completed in 2018 and cost a little under $2 million. We receive unprocessed food waste at this facility, where 99% of the inorganics and contaminants are removed, leaving behind an organic wet fraction that's converted into a pumpable slurry. The slurry is then transported via tanker trucks approximately 30 miles south to our wastewater treatment plant in Carson, which I will show you next. Next slide. So this slide provides an aerial view of the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant in Carson. This large wastewater plant treats approximately 250 million gallons of wastewater every day. This view illustrates the location of the plant's anaerobic digesters, the digester gas-to-energy combined heat and power plant, and a non-fossil fuel public vehicle fueling station, all of which are located on our property. Next slide. These tanks are part of one of our two slurry receiving facilities. These SRFs are where the processed food waste slurry from our MRF and a number of other external haulers is received. The tanker trucks park in front of an offloading bay where operators can connect a hose to load the slurry into the tanks. The tanks act as a buffer to help distribute the slurry into the digesters. Just like our stomachs, we have to slowly feed it into the digesters, otherwise they can have indigestion. The slurry receiving facilities cost about $3.2 million to construct. Next slide. So once the material is offloaded at the SRFs, the pumps continually feed our anaerobic digesters where microorganisms convert the organic material into biogas. This facility, as I said, is very large. It has 24 digesters, each with a volume capacity of 4.5 million gallons. We are currently only feeding slurry into 5 out of the 24 digesters. We have determined that each digester is able to comfortably co-digest approximately 80 tons per day of food waste. So we're currently accepting a total of 300 to 400 tons of slurry per day, and right now our current planned capacity is about 600 tons per day of slurry. Next slide. So the biogas that's generated from the wastewater digesters is used on site at the Total Energy facility. This power plant is able to produce up to 20 megawatts of renewable power, meeting the wastewater facility's full electrical demand, so that usually no power is needed from an external utility except as a backup power source. This combined heat and power facility not only produces electricity, but also steam that's sent to the digesters to help maintain a warm environment for the microorganisms. Next slide. Since we started receiving more food waste at the treatment plant, more biogas was generated than the power plant needed. So we designed and installed a biogas conditioning system that takes extra biogas and cleans and converts it into a renewable natural gas transportation fuel. What this facility does is essentially separate the methane from carbon dioxide and remove moisture and contaminants from the raw biogas. What you are left with is a clean and renewable fuel that can help displace fossil fuel-based natural gas. Our biogas conditioning system cost a little over $3 million, and we also installed a $2.4 million pipeline to bring the biogas across the street from the digesters to this conditioning system and to the fueling station. We are also planning to install a second conditioning system to increase our capacity as our food waste throughput and biogas production grow. Next slide. So the RNG that's created by the biogas conditioning system feeds an adjacent publicly accessible fueling station. In its current form, the station is able to provide fuel to light and medium duty vehicles such as vans, buses, and trash trucks, but does not have room to serve the heavy duty tractor trailer trucks. We are currently designing an expanded station and hope to have that up and running before the end of next year. So next slide. So to summarize our experience, I wanted to provide a few conclusions both in terms of sort of factors in our favor of why we think that we're successful, and then also some of the ongoing challenges. On the plus side, we're a large agency with the solid waste, wastewater, and energy recovery expertise. Our directors and management have made a long-term commitment to invest in this program, and we have some existing infrastructure we've been able to use, such as our MRF and our wastewater digesters, power plant, and fueling station. While the facilities needed have cost over $10 million so far, we have been fortunate to receive $6.5 million in grants from the state, and also a almost $300,000 sales and use tax exclusion that applies to recycling and renewable energy equipment purchases. Those have been very helpful for us. Another favorable factor is that we are located, of course, in the densely populated urban area that generates a lot of food waste. However, there are ongoing challenges. One challenge has simply been attracting as much feedstock as we would like to get. While we have contracts with some haulers, the contracts do not provide for a guaranteed amount of tonnage that will be delivered. And the sanitation districts do not collect municipal solid waste ourselves, so we depend on the commercial haulers that use our facilities. The solid waste market is very competitive, and many companies are vertically integrated and take the waste they collect to their own facilities. Another challenge is taking advantage of the state and federal incentive programs known as the Low Carbon Fuel Standard and the Renewable Fuel Standard, and those are to help incentivize these renewable transportation fuels. The rules for each program are very different, and it can be a long and slow process to navigate through them. As a result, while we have qualified for the LCFS, we are still waiting to receive payments, As far as the RFS goes, the application process took about 2 years, and during that process, EPA, it's administered by US EPA, and they kept asking for more information and adding new requirements, and it made it quite a frustrating process. And then another key point I want to emphasize is that the California Air Resources Board is considering regulations that would prohibit renewable natural gas vehicles in California, and the federal air quality standards will restrict the construction of cost-effective on-site renewable energy recovery projects in the future. Proposed air quality regulations may require new technologies to convert biogas to hydrogen, which is perhaps a less proven and maybe less reliable and more expensive technology. So we want to make good long-term investments, but it's hard to know which of our options will have longevity and will pencil out. And that is one of the challenges that we're facing, trying to make these decisions in real time. And then lastly, we have one other challenge we just wanted to mention. At full capacity, so once we reach the 600 tons, our program would accept the equivalent of food waste generated by 2.3 million residents. And the products we produce could be used by local jurisdictions to fulfill their SB 1383 procurement requirements. However, there's a number of different conditions of eligibility, and we're unable to meet one of those conditions, and therefore they can't take advantage of all these products that we produce. The regs don't provide for any kind of variances or time extensions. So it's a little bit rigid system. And so as a result, the jurisdictions are becoming frustrated because they can't find enough products to procure. And even though we produce these great products, there's a mismatch there. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. So in the bigger picture, I wanted to also kind of just summarize some of our conclusions and recommendations. Just to reiterate a point I stated earlier, the wastewater sector can potentially play a big role in helping the state reduce short-lived climate pollutants, and because the sector has the capacity to accept all 3.4 million tons of divertible food waste in the state in existing and publicly owned infrastructure. However, as you can tell from our example, for this to happen, there's a need for incentives, and there's a need to address certain barriers or uncertainties that exist. One thing I would mention on the financial side, the wastewater facilities, and again, these are publicly owned wastewater facilities, are limited in terms of the investments that can be made using ratepayer funds due to the constraints of Propositions 218 and Prop 226. Moreover, there is risk involved in making these investments, and public agencies have to have good reasons to shoulder that risk and answers for our boards of directors and the public if for some reason the projects don't go as planned. So therefore, when the new, what we would call front end and back end infrastructure, those that surround the digesters, have to be added to take advantage of these existing digesters, the availability of grants can really make a difference between a project going forward or an agency deciding not to pursue the project. And then there are the air quality and energy rules that are under development that may preclude development of the projected, well, in this case, in the projected amount of composting capacity that had been anticipated to be necessary. And the states, also the state's push for electrification of transportation, buildings, and exclusive use of zero, quote unquote, zero emission sources of electricity, meaning solar and wind. And those call into question the long-term biogas use and future markets for RNG. It is introducing a lot of uncertainty about the viability of those products going into the future. One example of an opportunity is the opportunity to prioritize incentives for conversion of big rigs to low NOx heavy duty trucks, known as near zero emission trucks, that have very clean engines that are commercially available that can run on renewable natural gas, such as what we produce. If the state were to lean into that policy priority, it would simultaneously reduce the harmful NOx and toxic air emissions associated with diesel fuel, particularly important in areas like Long Beach and Southeast LA County, where thousands of big rigs serve the ports of LA and Long Beach and travel through goods movement corridors, while also decarbonizing our fuel supply and encouraging markets for the fuel produced from the diverted organic waste. So it would close that loop and make it a circular economy. The South Coast Air Quality Management District supports this policy priority and has been advocating that far more funding be allocated to it, but some advocates have opposed it in favor of full electrification of heavy-duty trucks. And while that's laudable, these trucks are not commercially available and may not be for many years. So I guess I want to end by just underscoring the need, in our opinion, for better policy integration by the legislature and the administration of the climate, air quality, energy, and waste management policies. These are all interrelated policy areas, and we hope this is a topic that the Commission will explore more fully in its report and recommendations, and I wanted to thank you for having us here today.
Thank you very much. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you expand on that last bullet point? Give us some examples of what you're thinking. That's a nice, big, general package, but there has to be a lot inside it.
About integrating the different policies.
I'll take a stab at that.
Okay.
David Rothmar, I'm section in for the air quality section at the sanitation districts. So I deal with all the air regulations. So
Well,
maybe I
thank
can
you.
help a little bit.
And I should say, you've given us a lot to chew on, a lot.
Our apologies, it does get
No,
complicated.
that's all right. No, this is important, so.
But overall, I mean, I've been talking to Cal Recycle, CARB, air districts, kind of just figure out how do all these regulations work together? How can they work together? And there's limitations and there's opportunities. So one particular limit that we kind of be dancing around is we have greenhouse gas goals, and one thing we haven't talked much about is Clean Air Act requirements. So when you look at composting, it's a good illustration of what we could do with this food waste. We operate some compost facilities. When you compost, you don't generate methane, which is good for greenhouse gases, but you generate volatile organic compounds that is formed in the atmosphere, generates ozone. So that's where the Clean Air Act gets involved, and the air districts have very restricted requirements on what they can permit and what they can't permit. So that's where if you take all the food waste and try to compost, that tends to be a bit of a dead end for all of it. There's certainly opportunities for some of it. We have one compost facility in the Central Valley. If I just maxed that facility out, I would deplete all of the offset credits you need to permit such a facility. So it's a limited opportunity.
For the entire valley.
Valley, yes. So when you look at that limitation and say, okay, what do we need to do to move forward? And a lot of this would be, if we could get what we've been advocating for statewide when we talk to everybody, is to say, hey, Cal Recycle, CARB, air districts, Cal EPA, let's get together in a room and figure out how to move forward. How can we actually find a home for this food waste? And a lot of it is the pathway that doesn't cause problems with the Clean Air Act and actually helps air districts get to clean area faster is to take that food waste, digest it in existing infrastructure like we have at a wastewater treatment plant, and then put that into vehicle fuel. Gets the diesel trucks off the road, and it helps the air districts comply with the Clean Air Act. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that would be very productive at getting all those folks in the same
Good point.
room.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Questions, comments? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Byer.
Thank you very much for your testimony and all the hard work you put in every day. If Los Angeles was a state, it would be in the top 10 in the United States. So you all operate a very sophisticated, high level, and at scale. So an unfair question, but given the goals for organic waste disposal in 2025, what likelihood is there that the state will come close to its goals? And then the second question is, if you could do only one thing on your long list, in terms of state government, what would you ask the governor or the legislature to do to fill in that gap? Because I'm assuming there's a gap.
Well, I'm not quite sure where, on a statewide basis, where we are right now in terms of diversion and in the progress towards meeting the statewide goals. I think Cal Recycle may be in a better position to answer.
Well, then just make it Los Angeles County, and
And I think
Wh-
your next speaker may have a better handle on that as well. Mr.
Yeah.
Scott, you know, he's looking at things comprehensively for the county, so I think I'm going to defer to him on that. Do you want to jump in now?
I'm happy to give it a shot, and I'll cover more of this in my talking points. But the big challenge, honestly, for the state is on the collection. There's been jurisdictions that have implemented full organic waste collection as we are trying to implement through 1383, not just the green waste, which many cities have been doing for well over a decade or decades. But the challenge is, even with those programs implemented in some of the most progressive jurisdictions in the state for many years, they're not close to recovering that 75% of what's going to the landfills today. And I think in more urban jurisdictions with diverse populations, 89 jurisdictions just in Los Angeles County, 88 cities in the county unincorporated areas, reaching that 75% target just based on an additional bin and putting food waste in that bin is going to be very difficult. And I don't know that the state has addressed that. Right now, the regulations just say, put out that bin and put food waste into it, and you check the box. And I don't know that that's going to be sufficient.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, all right. So I think now this, perhaps Mr. Skye, we could hear from you.
Thank you so much, Chair Nava, and thank you to the distinguished commissioners for having us to present to you today. My name is Coby, Skye, as introduced earlier. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm a deputy director with LA County Public Works. And just for a little bit of context, LA County provides trash and recycling collection services for over 1 million unincorporated residents and 20,000 businesses in Los Angeles County. We also have county-wide and regional roles in implementing waste reduction and recycling programs and planning for adequate disposal capacity and organic waste processing capacity as required by state law. Just to give you an overview of what I'll be covering, I'll talk a little bit about what the regulations mean for LA County and their jurisdictions. I'll mention the ordinances we've implemented. We'll talk about food recovery, collection, capacity planning, infrastructure, outreach, procurement, and costs. And so feel free to stop me at any point through that. So it'll take me about 10 to 15 minutes to cover, but I'm happy to answer questions along the way. And this is one of the most significant pieces of legislation passed in at least 3 decades in California, and we take it very seriously. It's very important to us, but we really appreciate the work of this commission to provide recommendations to improve it even further and to make sure that it's successful, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want, all of us here. So starting with just a quick overview, as I mentioned, organic waste management is a top priority for LA County and the other local jurisdictions in California, as highlighted by the passage of SB 1383 in 2016. We mentioned that the goal of the bill ultimately is to divert at least 75% of the waste currently going to landfills by 2025, and also recover about at least 20% of the edible food that would otherwise be thrown away. CalRecycle actually adopted the regulations in 2020, and they took effect in January 1st of this year. So we're really in year 1 of implementation of the regulations. And just an overview of what those regulations require for all jurisdictions, that's every city and county in California to do. First is provide organic waste collection services to every resident, business, and local government facilities that we operate. To adopt an ordinance locally that requires organic waste generators to comply with requirements and provide a local enforcement mechanism. To monitor and enforce compliance, including issuing correction notices and penalties if needed. To procure recovered organic waste products such as compost or renewable energy. Recover edible food for donation, and conduct extensive community outreach and education. Jurisdictions who do not comply are subject to penalties of up to $10,000 per day. And jurisdictions in LA County are working very diligently to make sure that we are in compliance with these regulations. To implement these requirements locally for residents and businesses in the unincorporated communities, in November of last year, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors adopted an ordinance pertaining to mandatory organic waste disposal reduction. It requires all residents, businesses, and property owners to subscribe to organic waste collection service or manage their organic waste either through self-hauling or on-site management. It also requires businesses generating large quantities of edible food to recover excess food and contract with food recovery organizations like food pantries. The ordinance allows the county to enforce the requirements of SB 1383 that apply to organic waste generators, commercial edible food generators, and food recovery organizations in the unincorporated areas. And the county will implement most of the requirements of SB 1383 through our contract waste haulers. That's the primary way that we provide all of our trash and recycling services to our residents and businesses. If residents, businesses, or county facilities are not complying, we'll first educate and reach out to them to provide assistance before imposing any penalties. Per the regulations, by 2024, we may issue correction notices and impose monetary penalties for non-compliance for any entities that are not complying. Shifting gears to highlight a local success story, in 2018, LA County launched our food donation and recovery outreach program. We call that Food Drop. It's essentially a matchmaking program between businesses that have a surplus of edible food and organizations that they can donate that food to. And especially during the pandemic, it was a boon to recover that edible food and provide it to people most in need. Food Drop is very much aligned with the SB 1383 food recovery goals, and we're collaborating with many local cities to continue to expand that program. Switching gears to collection, we've also taken steps to provide organic waste collection services for all our unincorporated residents and businesses. We had to amend all of our existing residential hauling contracts to include organic waste collection, and we're transitioning our commercial collection from a non-exclusive system to a new exclusive system with 8 zones. Because we have so many diverse unincorporated communities, over 100 of them in the unincorporated LA County, it's taken a lot of outreach and many months to incorporate contract amendments into over 30 waste collection and recycling service contracts to ensure that we're complying with all of the requirements. And due to the new services, rates for customers are increasing by roughly 15%, in some areas a little bit more, and some less. In terms of capacity planning, SB 1383 requires local jurisdictions to ensure that there's enough capacity to process all of the organic waste that is collected from generators and recover edible food for donation. To ensure sufficient capacity, SB 1383 requires counties to collect the information from our cities, perform a county-wide analysis and planning for organic waste and for edible food capacity. That includes quantifying how much total capacity is needed at local organic waste processing facilities and food recovery organizations, how much is currently available, and what the gap might be. Counties are required to request information from each city, compile the data, and generate a final report which is submitted to CalRecycle. With 88 cities and over 100 unincorporated communities, that can be quite a challenge. And so as part of our countywide responsibilities, we've coordinated multiple stakeholder meetings, including hosting several workshops with CalRecycle, and developed a new website to make it easier for the cities to submit the data in the necessary timeframes. To talk a little bit about infrastructure through our capacity planning efforts, we've determined that just in LA County alone, we need an additional 5 million tons per year of organic waste processing capacity. So the city of LA talked about over 1 million tons just for their city. That's a significant amount of organic waste that we need to divert from landfills. We recently released, and I first want to give a lot of credit to both the city of LA and our partnership with the county sanitation districts. They've invested a lot in terms of capital and resources to develop local infrastructure, both within LA County and outside of it, to help us meet the new infrastructure needs. LA County is also doing our part. We recently released a request for proposals to develop a new regional organic waste processing facility through a public-private partnership on county-owned land at the Calabasas landfill. Using a public-private partnership reduces the risk for local jurisdictions and minimizes cost impacts to ratepayers, which, as we heard, can be a barrier to development. Although developers are working to build new facilities in the region, there will still be additional facilities needed. Identifying each facility requires at least 3 to 4 years to develop and construct, sometimes longer depending on local challenges. And identifying sites within urban areas in LA County is a significant challenge to new facility development. One potential solution that I want to highlight is mixed waste collection and processing, which studies actually show can recover 10 to 25% more materials than source-separated collection. Recently, CalRecycle worked with a local stakeholder group of facility operators, haulers, and local jurisdictions to approve an alternative measurement protocol that can be used by such mixed waste processing facilities to meet the SB 1383 regulations. This type of flexibility is really critical to helping local jurisdictions meet the goals of SB 1383, and we'd hope to see similar processes developed to clarify pathways for other new technologies to process organic waste, and that can help us to not just further increase organic waste diversion from landfills, but also meet all the other states' ambitious climate and sustainability and environmental goals, which LA County shares in large degree. To talk a little bit about the procurement requirement in SB 1383, as we mentioned, that's a pivotal component of the law that requires local jurisdictions to procure a certain percentage of organic products based on their local population. And it helps to sustain markets for recovered organic waste. To meet the target, local jurisdictions can purchase compost, mulch, vehicle fuel, biomethane, or electricity, but it has to be created from organic waste collected and processed in California. And there's a number of challenges with that, as Sharon was alluding to. The first step is to develop the infrastructure, and currently there isn't sufficient quantity of 1383 compliant fuel or other organic products to meet our requirements. Just to give you a context for that, in LA County, our requirement with all of the mulch and compost that we currently use in our parks, in our open spaces along rights of way, only would cover about 10% of the procurement requirement. And so we're looking to meet the other 90% through procuring renewable natural gas as a fuel. There isn't enough fuel in the entire state of California currently to meet that requirement. We're hoping that ramps up. It is a bit of a chicken and egg problem, but part of it is definitely figuring out that pathway to get certified as a producer of 1383 compliant products. So we're seeing new anaerobic digestion facilities being developed in the region. The renewable natural gas that's produced by these facilities has three main pathways to market, either as a vehicle fuel, pipeline biomethane, or to produce electricity. The market for renewable fuel is much more robust. The value that you get from selling it as a vehicle fuel is much higher, and that's due to federal and state incentives, assuming you can qualify and navigate that process. We expect that the markets for pipeline biomethane will grow in the next few years based on new requirements for gas utilities, but we haven't seen that materialize yet. Additional sources of renewable electricity are needed not just for 1383 compliance, but also other policies, especially around electrification, including zero-emission fleet regulations, building decarbonization requirements, and procurement requirements for electric utilities. So we really hope that we see more alignment of that. You're hearing that theme from all of the speakers. It's very important. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about costs. Implementing 1383 is very expensive. CalRecycle previously estimated that the statewide cost for implementing the regulations would be up to $40 billion with a B, including about $4 billion for infrastructure. And they estimated the average annual cost for businesses will increase by about $660 per year and about $20 per year for each household. Each jurisdiction in California is eligible to apply for local assistance grants if they adopted an SB 1383 implementation and enforcement ordinance, which we did locally. And we're very grateful. We're now receiving $1.4 million to cover education, outreach, enforcement, and other administrative and implementation costs for the unincorporated communities. That money will definitely go very far for us. The governor, as you've heard, also just signed the latest state budget that included $180 million in local assistance grants for organic waste infrastructure. There's another $10 million for food waste processing at existing wastewater treatment plants. It's a fantastic solution. $13 million for organic waste collection and processing, as well as food waste prevention and recovery. These investments are very welcome and expected to make a big difference in the successful implementation of this law. So in conclusion, LA County is committed to implementing these important regulations and continue to work collaboratively with CalRecycle cities, other counties, residents, and businesses to ensure they're implemented in a sustainable and equitable manner. We hope the legislature, governor, and state agencies continue to provide financial assistance to local jurisdictions, as well as increase clarity and more flexibility in compliance. Those last two parts are really critical in navigating, especially as we're ramping up the implementation. It's promising actually to see there's a number of bills currently being considered by the legislature that could provide that additional flexibility, and we're monitoring those closely. Reducing the time and costs associated with facility permitting and environmental review would support infrastructure development. That's very sorely needed as we're trying to meet these goals very quickly. One example, CalRecycle developed a programmatic EIR to support anaerobic digestion facilities developed in the state, and they established clear permitting pathways for these facilities. Similar efforts could be used to support development of biomass conversion facilities that would manage the roughly 30% of the organic waste going to landfills today that is challenging to reduce, recycle, or compost. We also encourage CalRecycle to collaborate with the Air Resources Board, Public Utilities Commission, and other state agencies to reconcile the ambitious vehicle electrification goals and 1383 requirements for procurement of recycled organic waste products. For instance, if there were more incentives for electricity or hydrogen produced from diverted organic waste to power electric vehicles or buildings, that could be a win-win strategy to reduce our emissions, address climate change, and divert organic waste from landfills. We appreciate the close communication we've had with CalRecycle leadership and staff in noting our concerns and providing oversight and recommendations while maintaining their enforcement role, and we look forward to continued collaboration with CalRecycle and with our other local partners. I understand you have questions. I'm happy to hang around as long as you would like. I can talk trash all day.
Thank you very much. It occurred to me, everybody's pretty consistent in talking about outreach and public education. Does anybody remember the model that was used by the State Water Resources Control Board with drought? I don't know if there were elements of that that were delegated to counties, or whether that was just sort of a flood of information that came out of the State Water Resources Control Board. And do you remember the whole thing, the first time around with drought, with the water and saving water, and that seemed to be effective. I just don't know the scale or how much it cost.
Are you talking about the public education campaign, the Save Our Water campaign? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how much it cost either, but they still have that. That's still kind of a
Right.
state campaign that they have, and I do think something like that is appropriate for CalRecycle to, and I'm trying to remember, I thought that they did actually get some money in the budget for them to do a public education campaign.
And was that, as far as you know, was that directed by the State Water Resources Control Board? It wasn't, or was it money that was doled out to counties and water agencies, water districts? I don't know.
I think there has been both. I
Okay.
think the state has had its own campaign that was sort of an umbrella.
So that, I mean, just for staff, it seems to me that might be something that we take a look at in terms of some sort of a model. It might not necessarily work, but clearly when faced with a crisis, the state was able to gear up and put together a campaign that seems to me to be to have been effective, and continue to do it, particularly given the condition of drought and the absence of water. Well, no, yeah, we're not paying any attention this time. We need a new drippy
Turn on
drip.
your mic.
Yeah, I saw Mr. I'm sorry, Mr. Skye, right? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that my understanding is CalRecycle is just in the process of launching a statewide campaign related to recycling and organic waste diversion. Part of the challenge for implementing a statewide message is that at the local jurisdiction level, even within different parts of the unincorporated areas, we may collect the waste differently. In some areas, we might have the same setup right now, and the food waste is still within the mixed waste collection, and we send it to a facility that can separate it. In other areas, we ask people to put food waste in the green waste bin.
Right.
But it can be very effective in addressing the why, the reason why this law is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me you sort of understand it. On the one hand, what the legislature said was, here's a goal. We need for you guys to reach it, but we're not going to tell you how to get there. And my recollection from the time I was in office is locals like that because, you know, it eliminated the state as a target, but it does contribute to the complexity because you can't really develop a message with respect to this because there are so many different means to implement. And Commissioner Byer has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This reminds me a lot of a phrase that Barack Obama used when he was in office, which is hope isn't a strategy. And what the witnesses, I think, for the city and the county have done very effectively is point out the opportunity the Little Hoover Commission has to offer suggestions about clarity. And at the top of the list is clarity about coordination between the Air Resources Board and Cal Recycle and the Public Utility Commission as an example. And what I think would be helpful is, as maybe a follow-up to the witness's testimony, if it doesn't become bureaucratically impossible, is concrete suggestions for us to go forward with concerning the legislature or the governor's office, because there are very specific things that have come up today about incentivizing biofuel for certain kinds of vehicles. At a superficial level, it sounds compelling to me, but I'm not an expert. Similarly, the need for capital allocation seems very strong, and given the state's budget surplus, spending money on capital expenditures seems like a wise thing. But I guess my question for the witnesses is, if you were in our situation and we're far from experts, what would you want to forward to the governor or the legislature as concrete, enactable policies in sort of an order of priority?
So I think funding is definitely the highest priority for across the board. We love seeing some funding for implementation. We're now seeing additional funding for infrastructure. That is probably remains our top priority. The second I would say is removing barriers. We're all very eager to see these regulations succeed, but there's so many different barriers, whether it's the complexity and conflicting regulations from different state agencies, or just hesitation about facilitating new technologies and new pathways. You know, what we've seen in really some leadership from both public and private sectors in developing facilities like the anaerobic digestion facility in Paris, like some of the mixed waste processing facilities, is they've really developed some of the biggest advances in new infrastructure that we've seen. And it was largely based on hoping, to use your phrase earlier, that the regulations will be successful in actually implementing collection systems that will support those facilities. So we need to do more to support that kind of investment.
If I could add to that, as far as if I could walk into the governor's office and make one specific request, it would pertain to his executive order saying that he wants to electrify all the vehicles in California, move away from fossil fuels. And in that order, it was to say, we need to reduce greenhouse gases, we need to do these different things for climate change. The only pathway, the only viable pathway I see with all the regulatory requirements and a difficulty siting new facilities is to take renewable fuels, non-fossil renewable fuels, and put them in the vehicles. That to me is a very specific ask, and I think the regulatory community is a little confused on how to follow through with his executive order and maybe some feedback saying this is a solution might be helpful.
Yeah, please.
This is the second time you've mentioned the Paris digester. Who manages that facility?
There's a company called CR&R. They're
It's a
the owners
private
and
company.
operators of it.
Okay.
Mr. Skye, you mentioned that, if I got it correctly, and I could have the numbers wrong, that the cost of implementation is $40 billion. Is that through 2025?
I think that's,
Or is that,
I forget the exact time horizon, but that's CalRecycle's official estimate in the cost of implementation statewide.
and is that broken down as to what the costs are?
It is. It includes outreach, and includes local collection and implementation, and includes infrastructure.
And is there a idea of how that will be funded?
There was no mention of funding. Again, certainly the 180 million in this year's budget is the most significant investment towards implementation we've seen so far. But and towards that 40 billion is still a very small number, and so largely it has fallen to local ratepayers to cover those additional costs. In the absence of other funding, that is where the funding will have to come from.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Byer that there needs to be quite a bit of coordination, especially when we're talking about those kind of numbers for the efficiency of use of funds and depending on where they come from.
So I'm a little confused though, because in one of your remarks just recently, you talked about that to the ratepayer, it's going to be like $20 a year.
That was CalRecycle's estimate.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, CalRecycle estimated, I think, somewhere around $18 per year per resident.
For the collection piece. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, although we've seen higher increases in that already. And some of that certainly is driven by inflation and other costs, but we're seeing higher increases to our residential customers.
All right, because what I guess I'm confused about is that in earlier testimony, we heard that the cost of per ton was going to go from $40, what goes in the landfill, $40 to $100 per ton. And I'm trying to put the math together, and maybe it's no way of putting it together, because $20 per home didn't sound a whole lot to me, to be honest with you. But the $40 to $100 per ton sounded like a lot. Are they related, or am I just putting things together that aren't related?
It is related, and let me simplify it a little bit. So for one, I think CalRecycle's estimate is probably a little conservative. The other is that your trash bill, whether it's provided like the City of LA directly by the local municipality or by haulers, takes a lot of different components into one bill. Part of that is what it costs to deliver that the waste that's being collected to the location.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing, and we're seeing similar numbers, $40 to dispose of trash that's picked up at a landfill, compared to $100 to $120 or more to take organic waste and send it to a facility. And that's just to deliver it to the facility that's processing it, whether that's a composting or mixed waste processing facility. There's additional costs for the outreach and education, for all of the back-end work to make sure that when you're arriving at that door, you have the right material in the right bin to take it to that facility. And then, of course, transportation costs. So all of that is factored into the bill that you get, somewhere around $25, $30 per month. And we're seeing increases of about 15% to our residential customers.
Oh, so wait a minute. So if the $20 that was just what we first referenced, so that's per month, not per year.
No, the CalRecycle's estimate is an increase of $20 per year, and we're seeing higher costs already.
It doesn't, something's wrong here with somebody's calculation. I'm just, because I caught that, I thought, wait a minute, it can't be that cheap.
We'll provide a copy of the study.
That would be great, thank you.
But it is, I think, now a couple of years old, so it may need updating.
And commissioners, I might mention that we will be inviting CalRecycle to testify at a future hearing on this topic, obviously.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to demonstrate my ignorance. With the biofuels, are there modifications required to be done to the engines in order for them to be used?
No, so that's the benefit of what's called renewable natural gas or biogas. Once you upgrade it to a vehicle fuel standard, it is molecularly identical to natural gas. And so any natural gas vehicle or natural gas equipment can use that renewable natural gas molecule for molecule.
Okay. All right.
And there's standards, very specific standards that CARB and the local air districts have on the type of vehicle to be clean for greenhouse gases and pollutants that are regulated by the Clean Air Act.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none. Let me express our appreciation for your presentations, for taking the time to join us here in Long Beach. I mean, I think you can tell from the interest in the questions by the commissioners. I think we take this as seriously as you do. And we are as invested as you are in helping to navigate this thicket of complicated regulations, demands, and requirements. And you are to be commended for taking on the task of trying to work your way through that sea of complications. So thank you very much again.
Thank you so much.
And Mr. Chairman, that concludes our witnesses. We will move on to public comment. For members of the public who have joined the meeting via Zoom, you may use the raised hand function. That is on your screen now. If you have phoned in, email us immediately at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov and give us the phone number from which you are calling. We will also take, of course, public comment from those who are in the room. For any public commenter, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The commission limits public comment to 3 minutes. So I've been given one request to provide public comment from someone who is here with us in the hearing room. It is Kelvin Garvani. I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. And you can use either the podium or the table, whichever you'd like.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelvin Garvan, and I'm a part-time worker for the City of Los Angeles Board of Public Works. I'm pleased that you all are here and holding this live, even though I did have to drive a little far to get here from Los Angeles. I wanted to actually begin by saying that I'm here to also support Sanitation Department and also the work of Compostable LA and LA Compost. One thing that LA Compost and Compostable LA are doing, they're really nurturing the adults of our old age, because on the ground, especially in that particular school, at Carver Middle School, they're really creating a connection to people and food, what they buy, what they eat, and actually then what they dispose of. And when you actually put it in those compost piles at Carver High School, someone sees where their apple core goes. They see where their banana goes. They see what's left of their nopal or something that they had maybe the night before. And it's very critical. It's very critical to see, if you will, a closed loop. In terms of what I think you can do, and the comments that I'm going to make are my own, even though I work part-time for the city, I look at some of the legislation that already exists. On the federal level, there are not enough organizations and individuals that are aware of the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Donation Act. I think that in 1996, during the Clinton administration, this Samaritan Act was actually enacted so that people could realize that they would have limited liability when they donated food. Here in California, Assembly Bill 1219, this is what they call the California Good Samaritan Act. There are still people in the catering business. There are still people in institutional services who say, I'm not going to give that away, man, because if I give that to someone who's homeless, they're going to get sick and they're going to sue me. Well, that's not necessarily true. Unless you have a buffet outside, there's a seafood buffet, and it's been unmanaged, and then you decide to give it to the Midnight Mission, then you might be in trouble. But if you give away food in good faith on the federal level with the Emerson Act, and here in the state of California under 1219, you will not be in trouble. In terms of how we look at where composting is and how it can become local, there's something that isn't being very well utilized, and that's the Urban Agricultural Incentive Zone Act, Assembly Bill 551. A lot of individuals say that, well, the developers, they don't want to get a low tax incentive on property taxes that really aren't that high, so they're going to leave that lot empty. Well, in actuality, there are so many corridors in the city and county of Los Angeles that have soil that is not really soil, it's dirt, that have arsenic and lead and other heavy materials in them that could be revitalized so that people could have a garden in front of their house, they could have a garden in the back of their house, or they could just have grass as opposed to Bermuda grass, which is basically something that grows where nothing else can. The Urban Agriculture Incentive Zone Act could be looked at and amended so that now you could actually have compost piles all over the city in some of these lots. Some of these lots where people can actually have intergenerational education, where older adults can actually get involved with intergenerational activity. If you have the composting piles, you can also grow things, and then you can actually share traditions that come from all around the country and all around the world in different languages. So the idea becomes looking at some of these mechanisms that haven't necessarily really been fully utilized, and that comes with education and outreach. I'm from
Mr.
New York.
Govan, your 3 minutes has expired. If you can wrap up quickly, please.
Okay. I think that what really needs to be put together with 1383 is Assembly Bill 954. This is labeling. And what happens with labeling is there are people who are getting free food. They don't actually want to eat it because they see the date on it. There are people who are giving away food that might not should be donated because of the fact that it is not going to be nutrient dense and vitamin rich. The last thing is what the commissioner said about a book. He said, draw down. A book that I read that was extremely informative was The Deepest Well by our California Surgeon General. On page 72, it says there are people who live in food deserts, and because of the amount of cortisol in their bodies, they want high fat and high sugar content food. They don't want any of these healthy vegetables. So in terms of how we're looking at even what is going to be given to people who are part of various distribution programs from these organizations, we have to look at the issue of public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Govan. I believe we have no other requests from anyone in the room to make public comment. Seeing none, Rachel, if you can call on the people who are online, please.
Yes, we have one raised hand on Zoom, Stacy Eaton. Stacy, you may begin your public comment.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. So good afternoon. My name is Stacy Heaton, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Rural Counties Environmental Services Joint Powers Authority, or ESJPA as we're commonly known. We represent 26 rural county solid waste jurisdictions statewide. And we really appreciate the Little Hoover Commission holding this hearing today and looking into and diving a little deeper into the implementation of SB 1383, because it's something that our jurisdictions are dealing with pretty much on a daily basis right now. ESJPA supported the legislation, and we want to ensure that the program is successful. And we're working very hard with our membership to try to help them implement these regulations and make sure that they are successful. Rural jurisdictions have some unique challenges though, and it is not maybe quite as easy for some of our rural communities to implement these regulations as it might be in a more urban setting. We have differences in landscapes, educational ability, and costs. And in some of our areas, when we talk about things like mandatory collection or other challenges, we have people that haul their own waste, and talking about, all of a sudden charging them for mandatory collection, as you might guess, we get some pushback from our residents. We're working through some inconsistencies and challenges with CalRecycle on the regulations. As we're implementing and as our jurisdictions are working through these things, they're finding that certain things are not consistent from the top down. And we hear things from the administrative level that we're hearing that are different from the local enforcement agents. So we're working through those challenges with CalRecycle, and they've been very helpful and continue to be helpful. But those are things that we are continuing to work through. We're also getting some inconsistencies between what CalRecycle is doing and what the SB 1383 law says, and also what CARB is doing with some of their regulations on fleet rules and things like that. For example, the CARB regulations for the advanced clean fleets currently don't provide a pathway for use of biofuels, and they're very laser focused on electric vehicles. So we very much believe that there is a pathway to making SB 1383 fully work and fully implementable. However, we do still see some challenges and some hurdles that need to be crossed there. And we're committed to continuing to work with CalRecycle and other agencies on making sure that we get through those things. However, we have to make sure that everybody is committed to working on those challenges. And that is why we are very appreciative, again, that you are diving into this topic and appreciate it. Thank you.
At this time, we have no other requests for public comment and no emails.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've then concluded our agenda.
All right. Again, let me express the Commission's gratitude to all of the witnesses who took the time to provide the information. I want to express thanks again to the community college for affording us their hospitality and the use of this extraordinary facility. And as always, thanks to staff, Little Hoover Commission staff, for making sure that everything ran on time and that witnesses, we could see and hear them, and commissioners had the ability to participate. And thank you, commissioners, for thoughtful questions. I'm sorry? Very smooth today. Yeah, it went really, really well today, according to the vice chair. And you seldom hear that. So till next time, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.